Chapter 873. Go-to Masayoshi could see that at the top of the burning bush, there was two fruits. On it, there were intermittent embossed lines surrounding it, some thick, some thin, some green, some red. That was blood vessels. His consciousness trembled violently. His thoughts and the veins in his blood vessels merged together, and he suddenly understood what the fruit on the bushes was. That was his eyeballs. His, at least in name, they belonged to him. The two eyeballs reflected each other, combining with the flesh, bones, and nerve functions at the back, piecing together a complete field of vision, and also reflecting the truth. That was the bloody truth that Go-to Masayoshi would never be able to experience under the framework of being a human. At this moment, all of Go-to Masayoshi's mind was smeared with strange and dazzling colors. There was no logical relationship between each color, and that was the color of collapse. Even so, Go-to Masayoshi was still attracted by this pair of eyeballs, and he could clearly see that the smoke of his negative emotions was wrapped by the essence of his flesh and blood. A part of it was left in the burning bush, which was also the rule system of the great Fusang divine tree. It was the accumulated heat of the sunlight that couldn't be used, and it was the final, meaningless venting. As for the other part, it was together with the people on the passenger terminal who were already seized by fear, together with the same color of emotional smoke. Under the drive of an invisible force field, it was thrown into the depths of the cloak around Mr. Mo, and it was thrown into an incomprehensible level. Although it was incomprehensible, he finally saw it. The pitiful quality that belonged to him was twisted, torn, and completely evaporated in the cracks of the opposing rules. The last of his rationality ended here. Go-to Masayoshi had no meaning left, and what was left was only the burning flesh, bones, and nerves. And these very quickly lost the outline of the human organs in the flames. Only that pair of eyeballs that were still filled with blood were shaking in the flames, emitting a demonic light. And it was also at this moment that the passenger terminal finally rang with a scream. The heavenly citizens that surrounded the area were certainly a collection of violent people from Ban City, and there was no lack of ability users among them. But when this scene unfolded in front of their eyes, it still broke the nerves of quite a number of people. They had been soaked in fear for too long, and they just lacked a trigger that would allow them to collapse. Plop plop, in the chaos, some people were directly pushed into the lake, subconsciously struggling, and even dragged their companions down with them. 2 to 3 people fell into the water, creating a huge splash, and also caused a slight wave on the shore. The undulating waves naturally spread along the embankment. Some of them even slapped a thick thigh covered in scales and fine hair on the side. A part of the deep purple mouth and a part of it, and a part of it apart. A part of the thin smoke flowed in and out, as if there was a high temperature and poison intertwined. A part of it. Apart. 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 Thin wisps of smoke flowed in and out of the deep purple slit. It was as if high temperature and poison were intertwining with each other as the lava saliva spurted out. Ah! It was unknown who took the lead, but a group of violent people scattered in all directions. At the same time, more people were knocked into the lake, and as they struggled and screamed in the water, what little order there was fell apart. It's a little ugly. In the virtual ring venue, the Pope of the 100 Collections sighed, looking a little disappointed. No, it's very pretty. Constance Dollar continued the conversation with the Pope of the 100 Collections. This was not a deliberate bickering. At this time, among the various audiences who were watching this live broadcast, a considerable part of them were in favor of Ms. Dollar. What they were watching, of course, was not the chaotic and vexed, heavenly citizens on the distant dock, but the entanglement and collision of Mr. Mo's cloak and the forest of burning flesh and bones in the process. Both were creations of special rules. They clashed with each other and penetrated each other, but neither of them was completely successful. This was a confrontation at the transcendent level, but because it was a live broadcast, the corresponding turbulence in the abyss could not be seen. However, it was precisely this half-concealed, half-restrained wrestling that made it all the more obvious. Every audience member, or at least every extraordinaire, had their own guesses. The vast majority of them kept their thoughts to themselves, but there would always be people who would express a very special kind of expression. This Mr. Mo seems to be a gentle person. As a world-famous fashionista, Xiao Saido's voice was quite gentle, but the meaning was even more subtle. Don't you prefer the tough type? Someone asked. Xiao Saido did not mind and continued. Don't you think so? Up until now, the Pope of the 100 Collections has exhausted nearly 40 rounds of rule changes, burning up the last bit of material carrier, but still unable to find out Mr. Mo's background. Is that so? Hee. The Pope of the 100 Collections laughed very sincerely. In Ban City, under the cover of the Fusong Divine Tree System, Mr. Mo can still control it to this extent. It's amazing. Fine control is only the most basic description. The concealment and concealment ability formed from this is the most amazing. 5 out of 7. 6 out of 7. After a few seconds of silence, Vice President Marin coughed. Gentle. What is the definition of gentle? Smiling, Xiao Saido stretched out his hand and drew an outline in front of him that was quite similar to Mr. Mo's. With Mr. Mo's ability to conceal his presence and restrain his psychic waves, as long as he doesn't want to show himself, the Pope of the 100 Collections wouldn't be able to catch his shadow even if he had 10 pairs of eyes. But he still showed himself. Why? At least from what I've seen and understood so far, he's standing up for his subordinates and partners who are in trouble. He's providing them with protection and support, and he's not hesitating to put himself in danger. This way of doing things, isn't this a gentle heart? Xiao Saido's embellishment sounded very praiseworthy and high praise, but anyone who knew him well would feel a cold slippery snake wriggling in their ears and chest. This is, how does the Pope of the 100 Collections do things? Even Dr. Pan could figure out the meaning behind it. Faint boos and laughter could be heard in the hall. Xiao Saido accepted it calmly. He didn't want to hide it anyway. He was 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers away from Ban City. No matter what, he wouldn't be able to get the first prize. In that case, it would be more interesting to make the situation more chaotic. But the problem was, would Mr. Mo, who seemed to have popped out of a rock, really do what Xiao Saido analyzed? Would the Pope of the 100 Collections and the Amaterasu Order under his rule believe in this judgment? Interesting angle. The Pope of the 100 Collections' tone didn't have any interesting reaction at all. The smile on his face had faded, and under his bald head, his entire face was indifferent. You might as well think of a few more good ideas like this. Just one. I can't entrust the foundation of Ban City to this so-called gentle heart. It was obvious from his words that the Amaterasu Order, or at least the Pope of the 100 Collections, wasn't too willing to go against this Mr. Mo in Ban City. As for true God Qianju, well, he might already be rubbing his palms together. At least for now, the Pope of the 100 Collections was still steering the ship, very quietly and honestly asking for opinions. Are there any other possibilities? Why would such a person appear in front of people at this time, at this moment, in this way? This is a question that I can't answer no matter how much I think about it. Why don't you all give me some suggestions? That's right, why? Intentional, unintentional, active, forced. These high-end ability users with rich experience could easily think of dozens or even hundreds of possibilities. But every possibility had to be supported by sufficiently solid logic. Then again, at their level, logic wasn't a necessary consideration. For example, the cause of this meeting. Gong Qi had already been dead for half a month. The Ability User Association had been searching for him all over the world, but there had been no progress at all. Suddenly, such a person had jumped out and openly displayed his deep suspicions. Moreover, it was in the territory of two top-notch extraordinaries. What logic was there to speak of in this? What do you think is going on? Dr. Pan tried to discuss with Tian Bang again. But this time, Tian Bang didn't join the conversation. Coincidentally, an order had entered his mind through the channel of the health pod. Major General Tian, the meeting hopes to understand the information related to the Blood Flame Order in the Jin Tong incident. Please be prepared to speak. 6 out of 7 was not enough. Was this a 7 out of 7? In the end, there were still people who couldn't stay idle within the restraint faction. The first thing Tian Bang reflected upon was his own self-control. Then he considered on an even broader level. Mr. Mo's sudden appearance meant that there was nothing else he could do aside from the Blood Flame Order as a clue. The Blood Flame Order was a secret order. Actually, it had been a rather well-known organization in the inner world for several decades. Everyone knew the ins and outs of the order. There wasn't much meaning in digging further. But if he could solidify the relationship between Luo Nan and the Blood Flame Order, then the monotonous clues would immediately be plentiful and three-dimensional. Back then, the Hill of Bones in the seas outside of Xia City had long since spread into the eyes of millions and millions of ability users in the inner world along with the broadcast signal. Was there a lack of 2 or 3 people among them? Which big shot of the military wanted to decisively take a side? Or perhaps this was a higher level of sitting on top of the mountain to watch the tigers fight? It was fine to show one's stance, but did they ask for the opinions of others? Tian Bang reflected upon himself for the second time. Was it because he had been acting far too easy to bully in the outside world? So much so that any random Tom, Dick, or Harry dared to use him as a gun. Dr. Pan. Have you checked the communication privileges of the experimental center recently? This I'm not too sure. What's wrong? There's a spam message coming in. You guys are quite open-minded. Tian Bang used his own privileges to form an overlay as he spoke. He adjusted it to the highest level of non-combat readiness. It wasn't to the extent of cutting off internal and external communications, but at the very least, there needed to be some sort of identity verification. Of course, he was currently in the midst of a human experiment. The verification work was handed over to his young but reliable aide, Lieutenant Colonel Zhu Ling, to handle. As for the spam message in front of him, what was the point of mentioning it? Having done all this, Tian Bang magnanimously became a spectator. Oh, there was also that speech. Things like bioelectricity disorder and memory errors were far too common during the human experiment phase. There was really nothing that could be done. The corner of Tian Bang's mouth twitched when Mr. Mo's thin and sickly face revealed a clear smile over at Osaka City. He extended his hand like he was plucking a fruit. He pinched one of the eyeballs within the flames of the thicket that was about to be completely burned away. I can study it for a bit. Wah! There was no telling how many people in the circular hall exclaimed at this moment. Most of them couldn't tell how many marvelous and subtle operations Mr. Mo's seemingly simple action had to be performed on the transcendent level. In any case, Mr. Mo had indeed plucked a fruit and pinched it with 3 fingers. But that wasn't the end. He raised his head again. This time, it was an overly direct angle that pierced through the projection of the live stream into the virtual circular hall. I want this one too. Chapter 874. What does he want? Has he discovered us? The higher the concealment ability of Mr. Mo's cloak, the more penetrative the light from his eyes, which were the windows of his soul. They were separated by thousands or even tens of thousands of kilometers, and the boundary between the virtual and the real lay between them. However, at this moment, a similar thought flashed through the minds of most of the audience in the virtual venue. It had nothing to do with logic. It was just their first feeling. However, the feeling didn't last long. While their thoughts were in turmoil, Mr. Mo's eyes remained fixed, and his body didn't move. The gigantic bloody fiend behind him had already made the clearest move. At this moment, the mushed-mouth ape moved from stillness to a great extent and at a great speed. It was to the extent that its enormous body was like a liquid, or like a wave of light that had broken through the barrier of a solid wall. The filthy color of blood mostly covered the glitter of the light wave, but the elements contained inside were even more complicated. It seemed that a violent chemical reaction was taking place inside the bloody light and between it and the materials in the outside world. The camera shot from Captain Jimmy's perspective was instantly polluted by the bloody light. The irregular halos and spots obscured most of the details there. F***CK. In the virtual venue, several people blurted out their catchphrases. The problem was that the terrible effect of the live stream did not improve because of their curses. On the contrary, the bloodstains, halos and spots were still unscrupulously expanding, smearing and polluting their visual field. In the end, they almost lost the meaning of analysis. There were only deformed bloodstains that interweaved into twisted and ever-changing patterns that were changing rapidly. The problem of the live stream continued to worsen, and there was no sign of it getting better. What's going on? At this moment, even Marlin and the others on the circular conference table couldn't hold back anymore. President Abner, on the other hand, quickly made a judgment. It seems that the operation team is under attack. As he spoke, he looked at the Pope of 100 communities. He was probably the only one among all the participants who had multiple perspectives. However, the Pope was still indifferent, and he seemed to be in a trance if one looked closely. He didn't respond to Abner's gaze at all. Abner shook his head slightly and turned around to consult a key person who was only separated from him by Marlin and hadn't spoken much. Chairman Mao, should we ensure the quality of the live broadcast? The so-called Director Mao was probably the most casually dressed person at the scene. He was sitting behind the conference table, and only a red and green floral shirt could be seen on his upper body. A pair of aviator sunglasses hung around his neck. It was as if he was projecting the beautiful scenery of the Sunshine Coast. One could imagine what the lower half of his body looked like. This was the truth. Not only was this Director Mao a veteran extraordinaire, he was also an independent director of Quantum Holdings in the secular world and the main liaison for the Deep Blue project. He was practically the highest representative of Quantum Holdings in the inner world. However, unfortunately, he was currently on vacation and was in the Gold Coast. He was forced to attend the meeting, so he was somewhat unwilling and yawned non-stop. However, at this moment, his expression finally tensed up. The vertical wrinkles on his forehead also stood up, and he looked very serious. That's right, we are now an operation team directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, and we have been attacked. This is a very serious matter. Director Mao was still describing the incident when someone interjected, "When will the live broadcast signal come back?" Director Mao acted as if he hadn't heard anything. The problem right now is the safety of the operation team members. Before he even finished speaking, the messy broadcast screen suddenly cut away from the blood-colored haze and restored the image of the Band City passenger terminal in broad daylight. However, the perspective of the live broadcast had already undergone a clear change. The angle that belonged to Captain Jimmy and was directly facing Mr. Mo had already disappeared. To be more precise, it was in the form of a painting within a painting. It had shrunk to a small area in the upper right corner, and what appeared on the main screen was a side view from the lake surface to the terminal. From this angle, only half of Mr. Mo's back and shoulders could be seen as he sat in a wheelchair. There was also the ever-expanding anomaly that had already lost its flesh, and was more like a translucent bubble of lava than an area of 20 square meters in front of him. F***CK, what is that? The mushed-mouth ape? The answer was right in front of them, but none of the audience dared to confirm it. At this moment, the internal radio waves of the operation team in Band City transformed into urgent syllables that appeared in the audience's ears. Captain. Jimmy, he's been swallowed. The formatted space structure has been destroyed. It's greatly weakened. Attempting to replace the main axis. Application denied. Deep Blue's platform location has disappeared. Apocalypse array. Blah blah blah. There seemed to be some sensitive word that the corresponding information had been masked. The following information was even more intermittent. However, the vast majority of the audience present possessed rich combat experience. They could make guesses and understand some of the situation. As it turned out, what Mr. Mo wanted was Captain Jimmy. A more professional term would be a high-end combat machine directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, or even the most cutting-edge 7th-generation dynamo core. Generally speaking, the roots of Jimmy's operation team were still a tightly controlled secret. However, the present virtual venue was the gathering place of the world's strongest experts. There was still a considerable portion of people who understood the crux of the matter. Their gazes unconsciously turned towards Director Mao again. The latter also began to slam the table. Vile. If he could restrain his expression a little more, perhaps it would have been more realistic. Even Dr. Pan could see it. Deep Blue and Apocalypse are at loggerheads because of the 7th-generation dynamo core. So it wasn't just a rumor. Tianbang wasn't too interested in this. He was more concerned about the details displayed in the live broadcast. At present, the operation team had clearly fallen into an extremely awkward situation. The captain had been swallowed, and the formatted space had fallen into a leaderless state. It had to be rearranged, but the following situation didn't seem quite right. As a top-notch burner, Tianbang very quickly discovered the abnormality from the operation team's password. Why can't the main axis be replaced? The authority of the commander should be handed over in sequence. The authority didn't pass. Dr. Pan's attention quickly shifted from the level of gossip to the professional domain. He made a professional judgment, but he soon fell into a state of confusion. Why? Since it's directly under the Apocalypse Laboratory, it's most likely the 7th-generation dynamo core. How could there be such a low-level bug in authority transfer? Why is it a bug? There's obviously another possibility. Tianbang stared at the blood-colored bubble in the projection area and said in a low voice, "Why can't it be Captain Jimmy, the commander, who hasn't completely lost his ability to command and hasn't completely lost contact with the other operation team members?" He's clearly been swallowed. Looking at that monster's appearance, it can't possibly have digested him along with his exoskeleton. Oh, could it be that the deep blue walkers under the control of the 7th-generation Dynamo Core have a qualitative leap in their ability to survive and communicate in harsh environments? That's why I said that these people shouldn't be called deep blue walkers. Apocalypse walkers should be more accurate. Tianbang nodded, then shook his head. The problem is that we don't know the nature and composition of the so-called mushed mouth ape stomach space, right? Dr. Pan shrugged. Think about its saliva. It's not a magma lake inside, but a sulfuric acid pool. The corner of Tianbang's mouth hooked up. Maybe it's not a sulfuric acid pool or a magma lake inside, but a simple space bag. At least looking at it right now, I can't recognize that fellow. There's no similarity between that fellow, an ape, or lava. At this time, from the perspective of the live broadcast, the blood-colored bubble that had swallowed Captain Jimmy seemed to have passed its peak period of transformation and was beginning to shrink. But its composition, at least in terms of density, didn't conform to people's logical understanding. It naturally became denser and denser. On the contrary, the blood-colored light was becoming thinner and thinner. Many times, a portion of the area would become somewhat transparent after a burst of undulations. It was like an illusory soap bubble. It seemed as if it could be blown away with a single breath. But the problem was that after the initial panic, the operation team had already begun a limited counterattack. All physical and energy ammunition were directed towards the blood-colored bubble. Attack! Attack! At least 5 deep blue walkers launched their attacks from the surface of the lake, from the sky, and from the distant commanding heights. The firepower interweaved into a net and converged at the visible weak points of the bubble. It seemed as if they wanted to rescue their own captain. But Mr. M.O., the instigator of everything, wasn't affected in the slightest. It seemed as if he was directly judged as a passerby. This passerby also didn't have any intention of interfering. He only played with the fruit he had just plucked with his fingertips. He allowed the astonishing firepower of the deep blue walkers to pour down on the increasingly weak, blood-colored bubble. The problem was, whether it was the metal bullets, high-explosive gunpowder, or energy blasts, regardless of whether they were supported by the format of fire, all of them were like clay oxen entering the sea after entering the blood-colored bubble. They disappeared without a sound. Tianbang said decisively, "This is absolutely not the structural model of a flesh and blood body. This fellow is highly energized. And then? It's relatively easy to mold. It's a natural building material." Dr. Pan was simply repeating Mr. Mo's previous description. This was also the only basis. Tianbang asked, "What is a highly malleable energized building material used to construct?" Before his voice fell, the blood-colored bubble really did turn into a soap bubble in the live broadcast. It burst noiselessly in a form that didn't have any texture. The howling net of firepower directly pierced through the pier's walkway in the area it had originally covered. It conveniently tore apart the 7 or 8 cars parked behind it. For a time, the sound of explosions rang incessantly. Gravel splashed in all directions, forcing the nearby veteran and the others to nearly jump into the lake. It was a belated display, but it was meaningless. The mushed-mouth ape disappeared along with the blood-colored bubble. At the same time, the fully armed Captain Jimmy also disappeared. That 300-kilogram top-notch creation that was a combination of man and machine had disappeared without a trace. Yes, disappeared. Tianbang felt that this was the most accurate way to describe it. He couldn't experience any of the so-called devouring texture. He only felt that this was a magic show that had occurred in front of the world's apex powerhouses. Captain Jimmy himself wasn't much, but he was the embodiment of the Apocalypse Laboratory's most cutting-edge research results. Had all traces of its existence been erased just like that? Tianbang only felt that this was too absurd. At this time, it was Director Mao in the flowery shirt who knocked on the virtual ring-shaped conference table with a deafening sound. "This is a disgrace. This is an extraordinary humiliation. Why the hell are we still doing a live broadcast?" The live broadcast screen began to blur as if it had heard his command. It looked as if the signal was about to be cut off. At this moment, someone sitting one person away from him also knocked on the table. "Continue." Abner's feminine voice was piercing like a sharp blade cutting through the air at this moment. Just a few milliseconds later, at least 3 to 5 powerhouses said in unison, "A painting within a painting." Chapter 875. It turned out that among people of the same level, there were some who were sharper than others. Similarly, there were also some who were more reserved. If not for Director Mao's order to cut off the signal, even if the extraordinary audience had seen through the trick, they wouldn't have exposed the truth in a tone that bordered on losing their composure in public. In front of the circular conference table, Director Mao spread his hands innocently. Under the high-resolution projection effect, the well-developed hairs on his forearms were clearly visible. But in the eyes of many, this extraordinary businessman, who was even more successful than Buhuan Gold back then, had sinister thoughts that were much more complicated than superficial hair. After being reminded, most of the participants stared at the small, picture-in-picture area in the upper right corner of the live broadcast and quickly captured the most crucial information. Captain Jimmy, who had clearly disappeared, had retreated to a corner of the live broadcast, but the filthy perspective that was presented in the form of a picture-in-picture was still there. It was still the same blood-colored spots that were twisted and densely woven. There was no entry point for analysis, but it was still changing and had some sort of vitality. This existence alone had already formed a contradiction with the reality that it had disappeared. And if combined with the goal that people had been discussing and scheming about, it would quickly transform into a predictable explosive point. Captain Jimmy had disappeared from this world, but he still existed. So where did he exist? Zoom in, zoom in. People like General Kenny, who had gone crazy, had already begun to bang the table and jeer, demanding that the live broadcast switch the small area of the picture-in-picture back to the main perspective. His request had not been met. In fact, it was a little presumptuous to obtain more information through a simple live broadcast. Dr. Pan, for example, had his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He even used the laboratory resources to strip down the transmitted data from the live broadcast and perform corresponding analysis. But he still couldn't find any pattern. He asked Tian Bang again, and the latter, who was trying to imagine Captain Jimmy's current situation, hesitantly said, "The only thing I can be sure of is that Jimmy's perspective changes greatly, which is completely different from the previous static view of the live broadcast. Extrapolating from normal environmental conditions, he should be moving or even rolling. But if there really isn't there, a normal environment should be an extravagant hope." And then, "You're already making wild guesses. How can there be anything else?" In fact, Tian Bang had other ideas. The changes in the shape of the blood-colored spots, including the brightness and dimming of the luminosity, and even the ripples caused by the signal interference, there should be some room for further analysis in the future. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to use the recently popular configuration theory? But no matter what, he had to have first-hand information. As for where the first-hand information was, it obviously depended on the provider of the live stream service. If Tian Bang could think of it, the others could as well. "Chairman Mao, what do you think?" President Abner returned to his usual feminine tone. He was neither too fast nor too slow, showing his respectful attitude. Director Mao didn't even blink as he replied non-stop, "I've said it before, this is definitely a vile incident. The Apocalypse Laboratories team stationed in Ban City was hired by the Star Alliance to take on the mission of attacking the cultists. Attacking them was undoubtedly a crime. As partners in all aspects of the Apocalypse experiment, we will communicate with each other. We must quickly reach a consensus and take action against this so-called Mr. M.O., who slaughters the innocent." It was rare that President Abner had the patience to listen to his long-winded speech, or maybe it was because Director Mao spoke too quickly, but he finally found a gap to cut in. "I'm talking about the picture-in-picture." "Picture-in-picture?" Director Mao appeared to be out of sorts, and didn't seem to be following President Abner's train of thought. The latter smiled and directly pointed it out. "Director Mao, Captain Jimmy's perspective is still there, isn't it? He seems to still exist in a certain area, and maintains signal contact with the outside world. Of course, we don't know if this is purely a signal from the equipment or if it's good news that both the human and the computer are still there. But before the results are confirmed, we should. In fact, everyone has more positive expectations." Director Mao looked around. Sure enough, there were only two types of people in the virtual venue. Those staring at the live stream and those staring at him. These people cast the so-called positive expectations gaze at him. Their eyes were bright and burning. Speaking of which, when he voted in favor of sharing the live stream resources, he didn't expect this situation at all. After a rare second of hesitation, Director Mao followed Abner's rhythm with some reluctance. It would be great if that's the case, but we don't have the information to support it at the moment. President Abner pressed close. There will be. The Apocalypse Lab should have it. As a comprehensive partner, be it Quantum Corporation, the Deep Blue Lab, or the Ability User Society, we are all willing to contribute and jointly decipher this information. Director Mao's expression was solemn. The wrinkles on his forehead and between his eyebrows formed a cross again as he tried to find his rhythm. Of course, we wouldn't have provided the corresponding live stream service otherwise. As everyone can see, the price is heavy. Speaking of which, at a time like this, the efficiency must be higher if we directly face the key issues and key people. Pope of the 100 Collections. What do you think? This was an excellent shift of the ball, and the method of blurring the focus was excellent. The participants began to look in all directions and listen in all directions. At the same time, they paid attention to the size of the live stream as well as the topic of conversation in the venue, for fear of missing a crucial detail. The Pope of the 100 Collections was also smiling, but he also took a longer time to respond. That's why I've been asking for everyone's opinion. Now that things have come to this, is Mr. M.O. being driven by a tender heart, or is he trying to declare something? Only by unraveling this riddle will we be able to take corresponding actions later on. Because of Director Mao, the live stream provided by Deep Blue, and the Apocalypse Lab, as well as the collected information and data, we might have found an opportunity to crack this riddle. All right, it was back to square one again. Director Mao was sure that he had been cruelly surrounded, but he couldn't blame anyone else. After witnessing the unexpected harvest of the picture-in-picture, his greed had arisen on the spur of the moment, and it had aroused public anger. Again, who would have expected that Mr. M.O. would actually make such a big mistake, and present the place that everyone coveted in front of everyone in such a manner? It was that place without a doubt. Right? Up until now, all the heavyweight conclusions were just inferences. But the continuous changes in events, although not to the point of being a solid hammer, were still like the chisels in the hands of craftsmen, knocking down the originally thick and heavy barrier bit by bit, exposing the outline of the truth. From now on, all that was needed was a little bit of imagination to more or less sketch out the entire truth. It was precisely this little bit that made the high-end people present wary, but it also inevitably stimulated gambling-like expectations. At times like this, as long as they were a little bit earlier than others, Captain Jimmy, who was a little bit earlier, and the Apocalypse Lab behind him, thus became the target of everyone's jealousy. Director Mao couldn't cut it in time, and couldn't cut it, so he naturally became the target of focus fire. Now, apart from throwing up his hands, he could only say some strange words and mock himself. You've gone around in such a big circle, but you can't even strangle someone to death with a knot. Why bother? Besides, he's right there. Just ask him directly. Ask. There was a sudden momentary silence in the virtual venue. Director Mao's words actually didn't have the effect of striking a blow to the head. They were just absurd. Would Mr. M.O. pay attention to you directly if you asked him directly? But on further thought, if he didn't pay attention, why would he openly expose himself? For a moment, the venue was filled with hesitation. A considerable number of them looked at one another, till someone ventured, "Why don't we have a talk? Talk about how to take Gong Chi's old life." "Shut up, you old bastard. Let's talk about serious business. Who's going to talk?" At this moment, the operation team's rescue operation had already lost its meaning. A few Deep Blue walkers stopped. They stopped at the scene of the incident with a dignified and awkward posture. Stopping was already like this, so there was no need to mention going forward to talk. If they forced it, it might be another Captain Jimmy. As for the last person to talk to Mr. M.O., Go-To Masayoshi, he had already died without a complete corpse. The surrounding Heavenly Nations people had also pretty much dispersed. Looking around, there was actually no one suitable to talk to Mr. M.O. in the vicinity of the passenger terminal. It really isn't easy to find someone. Their status isn't equal. The Pope of Baiji rubbed his bald head and smiled amiably. "Why don't I go ask?" Someone immediately objected. "Don't. It was so unpleasant just now. It won't look good if we fight again because of a disagreement." Of course, the synchronized translation of the participants was, "What if you take the opportunity to secretly give it to him?" That being said, if the Pope of Baiji wanted to take the initiative to communicate with Mr. M.O., no one present could stop him. Perhaps it had already begun. In a moment of desperation, Someone spoke indiscriminately. Why don't we let this person participate as well? Let that Luo. Someone pass on a message. Fortunately, this person didn't break his brain from the anxiety. He forcefully swallowed the word Nan back down. Even so, the expression in Ouyang Chen's eyes behind the smooth lenses made him break out in a cold sweat. Tian Bang, who was watching the excitement, let out a heh. Speaking of Luo Nan, when the situation developed to this degree, the sensitive speech came to an end. The affairs of the world were like this. It was better to have less trouble than less trouble. Previously, the secret of the alternate space was guarded to the death. Quite a few people here hated that they couldn't gang up and attack. But once there was a gap, they all thought of playing tricks. To put it bluntly, they were all people with great families and businesses. They could eat and drink to their heart's content just by opening their mouths. Who would be willing to give up wealth and glory and gamble their lives? If Mr. Mo had calculated this point and intentionally acted this way, then his methods alone were enough to show his brilliance. Just as he was pondering, he heard someone shout, "Oh, he's looking over again." Chapter 876. Everyone's gazes turned to the live broadcast at the same time, but soon, intermittent boos rang out. The reason was simple. The one looking over wasn't Mr. Mo, who had been a passerby for a long time, but the female assistant behind him. The first person to issue a warning was an extraordinaire. Even in the circle of his own kind, being directly looked down upon like this was quite humiliating. It was hard to avoid a few retorts. "Are you all blind? What did Mr. Mo just tell her?" "Is that so?" "It seems so." Someone testified. Mr. Mo had indeed called out to Yin Lu, and the latter had bent down to listen carefully. Since it was a side view, it was impossible to see what he had instructed her. But in a few seconds, Yin Lu straightened her body and turned her head slightly, giving the camera a clearer view of her side profile. The camera and the line of sight were at the wrong angle, but it was obvious that Yin Lu was looking in his direction. At this moment, Mr. Mo nodded to the veteran in the distance. He extended his thumb and pinky and made a hand gesture, indicating that he had something to do. The wheelchair beneath him turned around nimbly and headed towards the cruise that was docked at the pier. He had actually left just like that. There were no longer any obstacles between Mr. Mo and the cruise. Perhaps the Fusong Divine Tree's great divine treasure system hidden in the endless sunlight was one, but the Pope of the 100 Communities didn't show any intention of stopping him. There were quite a few people who suspected that this extremely intelligent Pope Empress Dowager had already used her geographical advantage to secretly form a connection with Mr. Mo. Hadn't he already volunteered to do it? After Mr. Mo left, Yin Lu, who had been acting like a personal member, didn't follow him. On the contrary, she turned her body towards the lake and nodded in that direction. The live broadcast paused for a moment. The camera language perfectly displayed the ignorance of the owner of the camera. Of course, he was definitely receiving instructions. 2 seconds later, the coverage area of the live broadcast began to shrink and rapidly converged on Yin Li's surroundings. It was obvious that the owner of the live broadcast was currently approaching Yin Lu. In the virtual venue, there were noises of "lock Mr. Mo down," but most people still maintained a high level of interest in the unforeseen event. In the end, the camera gave Yin Lu a close-up. From this moment on, the second-in-command of the Blood Flame Order, who only had a little fame in the inner world, had entered the sights of at least 2/5 of the extraordinaries in the world. However, her eyes were still a little out of focus. She didn't seem to understand Mr. Mo's arrangement, nor did she know anything about the live broadcast. She was just a narrator. What Sir means is that you can start bidding now. The virtual venue was silent for a short period of time. A considerable number of people looked at each other and exchanged glances. And on a level that was invisible to the audience, the information exchanged in secret should be 1,000 times more than this. With great difficulty, someone finally followed up, "That's direct enough. Are you sure he didn't participate?" Or perhaps, the vast majority of people added a connection in their minds. Their gazes, whether direct or indirect, revolved around Ouyang Chen and Her Majesty Empress Wu. Unfortunately, there was no response. Yin Lu didn't explain further after that. Instead, she turned to the veterans and comforted them. In the blink of an eye, the amount of energy and tongues spent on this had already exceeded the so-called announcement of the price. Moreover, the difference was still growing. This also made all the participants certain that they couldn't obtain any more information from the live broadcast. What made them even more annoyed was that the most crucial picture-in-picture had stopped. It was as if an absurd play had suddenly come to an end. The abstract changes that could cause the imaginations of the extraordinaries present to run wild had suddenly locked onto a single instant. Even if all the participants' gazes were focused on it, they couldn't move it even a little bit. Several seconds later, that small window turned into an irritating snowflake noise that drowned out the last bit of people's thoughts. F***CK. This is provocation. Someone slammed the table and stood up. His stocky figure looked extremely intimidating, but unfortunately, there were only a few who responded. The vast majority of people's thoughts were far from reaching the point where they needed to display extreme emotions. They only grew like weeds and flew around like mosquitoes. What's the meaning of this? Is he trying to show that he can control the transmission of information from the alternate dimension? Why is he in such a hurry to show this? Is he tired of living? Does he really want us to bid that alternate dimension? Cooperation and development? That's so smart. Is he overthinking things? Maybe he's simply saying this to that operation team, to the people behind them. He's saying that he wants to use money to redeem them. Inside and outside the venue, the interaction between many people and many levels continued to heat up. However, the significance of the virtual venue itself wasn't that important anymore. I need to reflect on how a mere appraisal meeting has come to this stage. Amidst the buzzing noise of the virtual venue, President Abner gently stroked the yellow beard on his cheek. He maintained a state of communication with Director Mao on Marlin's side, but the topic of conversation changed extremely quickly. The broadcast from T-City has stopped, but I heard that Kadru's soul has returned to his body. No matter what he does, he's still a member of the society. Today, his soul was heavily injured, and the consequences are hard to predict. The society has to do something about it. In a private conversation, Director Mao was much more frank this time. Well, we're the ones who contacted Kadru. As the person directly responsible, we're the ones who can't shirk the responsibility. Don't even think about it. We definitely won't let such important research material go. Is it Tianchi who's not letting it go, or is it Deep Blue who's not letting it go? We can discuss this issue after the meeting. President Abner laughed. Why do we have to discuss after the meeting? Of course, it's not good to end it in a hurry. Why don't we take a break first? The last sentence was directly transmitted to the ears of every participant. Take a break? At present, the situation has already exceeded the scope of the original topic of the meeting. Due to the limitations of the conditions, there are still many people who haven't had the time to attend the meeting and participate in the discussion. For example, His Excellency the Priestess of the Order of Justice. Why don't we take a break for now? Tomorrow, or perhaps a few days later, we can discuss it again. Most of the participants were somewhat tempted. In reality, there were indeed many people who needed to gather their scattered thoughts. They also needed some time and space to settle their thoughts. But then again, if the meeting was adjourned, there was no doubt that it would give some of the true bigwigs the opportunity to form alliances. Perhaps the entire situation would be completely different during the next meeting. It was even uncertain whether there would be a second half of the meeting. Many people fell into a dilemma. The problem was that as the organizer of the meeting, President Abner had sufficient authority to enforce this suggestion. The next second, before some people could voice their objections, Marlin, who had received a signal from President Abner with his eyes, knocked on the table. Then we'll take a break. As for the resumption time, we will inform you later. Someone cursed out loud. However, the broken signal connection turned all of this into meaningless nonsense. Most people didn't have the leisure to care about this. They needed to spend more effort to lock onto the truly meaningful information from this conference that had almost no conclusion. They also needed to use their own connections and other resources to search for the mine and dig out the real gold. Of course, for some people who currently had first-hand information, it would be even better if they could seize the opportunity to capture a new entry point. The plans of the higher-ups always needed to be executed by the people at the bottom. Right now, in the operation team at North Mountain Lake, Team Deputy Men had received the latest order. This order bypassed their direct superior, Supervisor Bai, who did not really fulfill her responsibilities, and directly took command through the internal authority channel. Lock the original format space settings and Captain's main authority. Activate full sensory mode. Until there is a clear change of command, maintain this state. Mend confirmed his new supervisor. At the same time, he also confirmed that this old superior, who was slightly younger than him, was still in a bad mood. Therefore, he first opened his mouth to accept the order. After a while, he carefully added, "Supervisor Yen, currently, the Apocalypse Array can no longer detect Captain Jimmy's signal. I'm afraid we won't be able to hold on here for too long." Yen Yongbo's voice sounded like he was chewing on ice. "I will activate the superior structure to give you the necessary support." Aren't you in T-City? If it's consumed, care about what you should care about. Yes, sir. Mend subconsciously straightened his back, causing the entire Deep Blue Walker to buzz. At the same time, the 7th-generation dynamo core that was deeply implanted in his brain and spinal nervous system emitted a clear electrical signal. It actively connected to the archetype format hub of him and all the other team members around him. A layer of faint yet real and wonderful structure spread out from the distant void. It also seemed to be growing from the inside out. The two ends, near and far, resonated with each other and fused together at a higher level that surpassed the spiritual sea. In less than a second, Yen Yongbo's superior architecture had crossed thousands of kilometers of the Pacific Ocean, arrived at Osaka, and exerted its influence. However, this function was rather restrained. It was only a template with a weak stickiness. It helped the formatted space on this side, which was on the verge of collapsing due to the lack of the main axis, to do a simple splicing and gluing. At the same time, the missing structures that had been glued together formed an even stronger magnetic force between each other. Then, he used this magnetic force to search for the signals of the main axis that had been cut off. As for whether it was useful or not, Mend, who was on the front lines, wasn't sure. It wasn't just because the signal was so weak that it far exceeded the limits of his perception. It was also because after the superior structure was laid down, frontline personnel like them only existed as antennae. They no longer needed to undertake the function of analysis. It should be useful. The long-range support of the Apocalypse Array consumed a lot of electricity. Mend's active thoughts gradually settled in the deepest part of his heart until he entered an extremely quiet and pure state. Whether Captain Jimmy's signal was there or not was no longer a problem for him to consider. Chapter 877. At the intersection of a certain residential area in Nade District, a black nanny van was parked by the roadside with its engine off. However, Hai Jing, who was in the driver's seat, was not idle at all. Other than answering phone calls, he was adjusting his schedule. When he finally had a chance to catch his breath, he looked at his watch. It was almost 5 minutes past the agreed time. He sighed and made another call. "Emoya! Open the door." The door at the back opened, and Emoya stepped in with her handbag and sat in her seat. However, the other seats were empty. She and Hai Jing were the only two people in the car. Emoya tied up her hair and asked, "Where are the others?" Meng Fei took them to the venue first. Unlike some people who are 10 times lazier after one trip to the music festival. "By the way, is there a guest at home?" "I saw people coming in and out of your house. Who would come to visit in the middle of the afternoon?" "A bunch of annoying people. Let's go." It was rare for Emoya to be agitated. Hai Jing didn't ask any more questions. He started the car and changed the topic. "Just now, the company's IT department came to ask about a bug in your personal information retrieval system. It's probably a bug in the SCA's debugging system. Next week's event won't be easy. I happen to be working there, so why don't you let me know?" "Emoya." "Got it." Emoya's irritation clearly continued. Hai Jing felt a little strange this time. He couldn't help but turn his head and wanted to ask, but he saw a slender figure coming out of the residential area from the back window. "Rue-1 is going out too? It seems like there's an activity at school." Emoya opened the carriage door and called out from afar. "Rue-1, come here." Rue-1, who was dressed in the school uniform, maintained her silence. She moved over to the side of the car and only replied with a big sis Emoya when she heard Hai Jing's greeting. "Brother Jing." His words and tone were exactly the same as Luo Nan's. Emoya put on the demeanor of an elder sister. "Rue-1, go to school? I can give you a lift on the way." What kind of activities did the school have on Sunday afternoons? Also, how was it on the way? Hai Jing felt that something was amiss. He quickly calculated the route in his mind, but in the end, he could only form a large triangle on the map. However, as a manager, she had to solve this problem. He also smiled at the thin and somewhat autistic girl and beckoned her to get in the car. However, Rue Wen didn't appreciate it. No need. After simply spitting out these two words, Rue Wen bowed in this direction. She was polite and distant, and then directly walked away. Hai Jing raised her eyebrows. Acting like an elder sister, huh? It's because you're here. I have a good relationship with her. The little fellow is independent, so you don't have to worry about her. Yeah, he's just like his brother, a liar. Hai Jing was confused by Mo Ya's words. The only thing he could be sure of was that Mo Ya was currently in a bad mood. It was best not to provoke her. The nanny van started moving, and Hai Jing soon realized that there were many other cars that started moving at the same time. There was one in front, and two behind. They were all very sturdy models of the same model, sandwiching the nanny van in the middle. It was fine at first, but when they left the neighborhood and got onto the main road, Hai Jing's nerves tensed up. Is this kidnapping? Mo Ya snorted. Bodyguards. Hai Jingdo forgot to drive and turned his head to ask, Mo Ya, which big shot has booked you? I hope that's the case. Mo Ya's words had just left her mouth when the car in front suddenly slowed to a stop. The car behind followed, activating the safety distance control function, and the nanny van was stuck in place. Hai Jing only cared about turning his head to talk. He fell forward due to inertia, and his ribs hit the steering wheel. Under these circumstances, he really didn't know whether or not to believe Mo Ya's words. Isn't this kind of bodyguard a bit too rough? A knock on the window rang out, and a tall, thin and vigorous figure appeared outside the driver's seat. He had a familiar face. Hello, Mr. Hai Jing. Are you free? Hai Jing's ability to recognize faces was quite good. After staring blankly for 2 seconds, he recalled a string of memories from the depths of his heart. Last year's university birthday, the municipal square, the first performance after signing a contract with the band Mountain Creek, the extraordinary person in the underground passageway. Of course, there was also the close relationship between this person and Luo Nan. He remembered that when he first met Rue Wen, this person seemed to be there as well. Me, Mr. Qin? It's me, Qin Ikuan. Qin Ikuan greeted him through the car window. We meet again. I've just been hired to be Mrs. Mo Ya's full-time driver. Please take care of me in the future. Hai Jing clearly knew that the matter wasn't that simple, but he still asked a very stupid question. Who hired you? You can think of it as Luo Nan. Mo Ya replied from the back seat. It felt more like a sigh. The nanny car started up once more, and Hai Jing had already switched from the driver's seat to the front passenger seat in a daze. As a manager, he wanted to get to the bottom of things, but he didn't know where to start. As his line of sight shifted back and forth, he suddenly saw Rue Wen, who had just left coldly, burying her head into another flying car near the entrance of the residential district. It was a sports car with a more distinctive style. The sports car quickly started up, and soon it ran alongside them. The driver of the car even pressed down the window to greet them. Teacher Cat Eyes? Cat Eyes gave him a smile from the driver's seat. The car sped up, leaving the fleet of cars behind in the blink of an eye. For some people, the world has already changed. It's quite troublesome to adapt to it. But in this sort of situation, they still want to hide it from everyone, especially from their family. This is undoubtedly making things awkward. It's meaningless. Cat Eyes' current state wasn't all that great after being tormented by her boss for quite a while in the wee hours of the morning. She let the car go into autopilot mode after entering the high-speed magnetic rail. She simply curled up in her seat and chatted with Rue Wen. You also feel that it's very inconvenient, right? As long as those bureaucrats don't make mistakes, they won't be afraid to do things. So they lick up especially hard. It's very disgusting. Rue Wen sat quietly in the front passenger seat, not responding to this sort of topic. Cat Eyes didn't mind either. Over there was the big boss, and over here was the small boss. The more she interacted with them, the more she knew that these two were unfathomable freaks. Of course, the small boss was a bit cuter. Cat Eyes reached out her hand to touch Rui Wen's jade-like face as she thought this. But before her fingertips could reach Rui Wen's face, the little girl in the front passenger seat was like a translucent bubble. She suddenly burst and disappeared. All that was left was a tiny ripple in the void. Oh, there was also the whisper she left behind. Thank you, Sister Cat Eyes. TSK. She's also an awkward child. Rui Wen relied on Cat Eyes to leave her home normally. She didn't need to conceal anything in front of people who knew her inside out. She simply crossed the barrier of the void and stepped into the cloud world. She felt an abnormality the moment she entered this void. The stability of the void she was in was very questionable. It was as if many traps were buried beneath the surging flow of clouds and mist that could collapse at any time. The invisible depths of the void seemed to have turned into quicksand that was scoured by an underground river. It had lost the stability she had achieved over the years. Rui Wen opened her mouth, wanting to call out to Luo Nan, who was somewhere unknown. But in the end, she didn't make a sound. She wasn't used to addressing Luo Nan as such. Brother. She didn't want to call him. Luo Nan wasn't polite enough. Therefore, her normal behavior was to completely forego addressing him and directly communicate with him. The transmission of sound waves was actually the least effective in the current situation. Rui Wen was more used to using her mental senses to capture Luo Nan's location and directly teleport over. But the current situation didn't seem to be suitable. Rui Wen suppressed the power she was used to. She simply pondered for a moment before turning her body. She didn't circle around the half-collapsed void traps. Instead, she directly plunged into them, allowing her body to sink into the depths of the unfathomable region. Rui Wen entered the misty maze in the next second. The void barrier, which originally required the strength of an extraordinary to go all out in order to blast open, had already turned into a nearly rotten wooden board. Anyone could casually enter. Of course, this was only limited to the surrounding region. There was nothing much to say. This was the effect of Luo Nan's power. There was still a certain distance between Rui Wen and Luo Nan right now. Luo Nan had already discovered her arrival, but he was unable to split himself for the time being. He had no way to greet her. Rui Wen knew from this that Luo Nan's current situation wasn't too good. She pursed her lips and didn't make a sound. She followed her senses and made her way through the misty maze that had no concept of up or down. She hadn't been here for a few days, but this world gave her the feeling that there were some changes. The trillions of fragments seemed to be trying out some sort of new arrangement, but they weren't able to completely take shape. They were like a pot of thick rice soup, but there were some special textures in specific regions. For example, Rui Wen saw the silhouette of a person. His skin was dark and heavy, and he wore combat clothes. He was wrapped within the thick mist. He seemed to be twitching, but his body was clearly restricted. The texture of the surrounding region wasn't of the rice soup type. Instead, it was more like a tangled ball of silk rope. To be exact, it was more like pieces of a spiderweb that trapped mosquitoes and flies. As for the person within the spiderweb, Rui Wen didn't recognize him. The newcomer clearly sensed Rui Wen's arrival. His eyes were half opened and half closed. He wanted to open them, but he couldn't. His arm was still struggling within the mist, but he was ultimately unable to break free. Clearly, his self-awareness wasn't enough to break free from this spiderweb-style confinement, as well as the deeper confinement strength. Rui Wen also noticed that there were several transparent needles piercing into the area of this person's head. The front end penetrated deep into the skull and even the other organs of the body. An extremely long thread extended from the back end of the needle. It was connected to a certain region within the misty maze. There was a rich and varied energy and information that flowed and exchanged between them. Rui Wen was soon convinced that the back end of the needle was Luo Nan's current location. She didn't pay any more attention to the figure within the spiderweb. She followed this guidance and continued to make her way through the maze. It didn't take long for the rough house that Luo Nan had constructed in the depths of the misty maze to appear before her eyes. It was just that most of the edges of the rough house had already melted away at this moment. Chapter 878. In the end, Rui Wen's perception was extraordinary. She suddenly stopped halfway through. She stopped in front of an extremely blurry boundary and hesitated. If she went any further in, it would probably result in a bad influence. However, the summoning intent inside was very clear. Rue Wen hesitated for a second, but in the end, she still stepped forward into the area ahead. Fine waves gently rippled out following Rue Wen's movements, forming marvelous ripples in the void. Horizontal and vertical waves rose and fell, dense and alternating. They reverberated back and forth, erasing the surface color of the mist. This scene, which was originally a relatively simple fusion of the virtual and the real, suddenly had many blurry silhouettes and colors. It was like a projection that wasn't quite successful. Layers and layers interweaved together. Rue Wen also saw that there were a few structures that were already relatively clear. They were similar to mountain peaks, rivers, buildings, and even more refined vehicles. They suddenly collapsed, and then they were reconstructed under the push of some sort of continuous but relatively chaotic force. It was just that there was already a clear difference from the scene before her. And so, Rue Wen knew that Luo Nan should have some new ideas and new harvests in the construction of his sandwich domain. But she could tell from this part of the scene that his results were still relatively weak. The boundary between the real and the imaginary was not clearly sorted out. It was quite sensitive to external stimuli, and its internal structure was not clear enough. It lacked stability. As the sole designer, Luo Nan didn't seem to be ready yet. In fact, Luo Nan's gaze was always focused on Rue Wen after she entered this area. He attempted to analyze her deeper nature in order to make this area better accommodate her existence. Rue Wen was very happy to cooperate, but Luo Nan's ability was truly insufficient to complete all of this in a short amount of time. Luo Nan gave up after a few adjustments. Rue Wen also took the initiative to restrain her energy and adjust her state. She made herself closer to nothingness in order to avoid bringing even greater stimulation to this area. And so, Rue Wen entered the space of the withered tree. This space completely imitated the structure of the withered tree of the real world. It was as narrow and small as the real world was. Though it was narrow and small, the structure of this space looked much more stable with the blueprint provided by Luo Zhongheng. It was no different from the real world. Rue Wen found Luo Nan without expending any effort. Right now, Luo Nan was in the resting room at the lower level of the tree hole space. He sat on a circular seat leaning against the wall with his head lowered. His breathing was long and drawn out, but an unstable situation would occasionally appear in the middle of it. His back was bent, his arms were crossed, his legs were crossed, and he was sitting very openly. However, if one looked closely, one would find that the structure of his body and the details of his movements were very unnatural. As he breathed, many parts of his body appeared stiff or distorted. In front of him, there was a pile of metal components, all of which were exoskeleton configurations. They were in a mess and were not taken care of. Bloodstains could also be seen in the messy pile of spare parts. His injuries are very serious, Rue Wen stated the facts directly. Yeah. Luo Nan gave a simple response, but he didn't raise his head. In fact, his spine was injured, and normal movements were extremely strenuous. His voice was hoarse and weak. Rue Wen didn't say anything more. She just walked forward, and her slender and slightly cold fingers lightly rested on Luo Nan's neck. She made a slight shift, and she detected many areas of swelling, collapse, and even deeper and more serious injuries. Luo Nan was immediately unable to maintain his deep state. He shouted loudly, "Stop touching. It's itchy. It hurts." Rue Wen's fingers lifted up as if she had been electrocuted. She froze there, not knowing what to do for a time. Hiss. "Don't worry. I'm super sensitive right now." Luo Nan hissed as he spoke. His entire body was trembling. Right now when he opened his mouth to speak, his entire internal organs twitched slightly. However, there were some things that needed to be explained clearly. The main thing is that the perfect body created by the lamination interference isn't that easy to bear. It was so fun to bully people just now, but now the backlash is life-threatening. I'll help you reposition it. Rue Wen didn't participate in Luo Nan and Dean Wan's academic research process, so she didn't really understand what a perfect body was. However, she discovered that there were over a dozen bone fractures on Luo Nan's body from her rough observations just now. His internal organs were also displaced and damaged. If Luo Nan was a normal person, he would already be struggling for his life in the ICU. Luckily, Luo Nan was still able to laugh. He really was laughing. Wait a moment. Let me memorize everything first. Ruiwen still didn't understand. The injuries are quite serious, but these are all the consequences of having an incomplete exoskeleton frame. Not this pile. This is what I stripped off the body of the fellow outside. Cold sweat was dripping down Luo Nan's cheeks, falling onto the gaps between the exoskeleton fittings. There was even a thin layer of dust on top of these fittings. He nodded with his chin. It should be these. Master Shou used the rib bones of a ghost ox to process them. Their toughness and transformability are pretty good, but their strength is a bit lacking. Right now, all that's left is a layer of dust. I relied on this toy to forcefully push myself to the perfect body. But right now, there's only this bit left. It has absolutely no value as a reference, so I can only rely on myself. I need to memorize all of the injuries. I need to see where the problems are. Only then can I fix them. I don't want to fall into the same pit next time. Ruiwen frowned slightly. But, Luo Nan gasped for breath and continued speaking. Oh, my nervous system is preserved quite well. And right now I'm quite excited. This is the best opportunity. I've prolonged this state because I need to seize the time to record all of the feedback from my intuition. I feel like everything is going to be a mess when I return to my suppressed state. You're here just in time. Help me out as an observer. We'll compare the results later. If you remember clearly, then you'll learn. But if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you'll suffer a huge loss today. Ruiwen could see that Luo Nan was indeed in a rather excited state right now. Though his injuries were serious, his mood was quite high, so much so that he was especially talkative. But the more he was like this, the fiercer the suppression effect would be, and the more severe the consequences would be. In the end, she wouldn't go against Luo Nan's intentions. She pursed her lips and stared blankly for a few seconds before nodding in agreement. Luo Nan grinned and projected a work area. Many important details had already been recorded on it. There was also a simple drawing of the human body. The words and text were combined, matching one to the other. Clearly, he had spent quite a bit of effort. Ruiwen used her unique sensing ability to understand Luo Nan's body and soul frame. Her understanding of Luo Nan's body and soul frame was not inferior to Luo Nan's. She knew Luo Nan's progress with just a glance. He could even find some deviations from his own senses, so he pointed them out one by one. Her ability to describe was quite bad, but Luo Nan was quite alert. As long as she pointed to a location, he would be able to quickly correct it without needing to say much. Oh, this nerve cluster. I didn't even notice it. The relevant area is numb. Luo Nan gave her a thumbs up. You've written the words very properly. Clearly, Luo Nan strove to construct a relaxed atmosphere. It was just a pity that Ruiwen's sharp perception could easily cut through all of his disguises. You've worked hard. How can it not be tiring to be injured? It must have been really good in front of you. What I'm saying is, Ruiwen needed to think about what to say. You've been working very hard with me here. Luo Nan didn't find her words strange. It was just that when he wanted to console her, sweat soaked into his eyes. His eyes were unbearably dry, and he cut a rather sorry figure for a time. Ruiwen immediately reached out to help him wipe it away. Her fingertips didn't touch his pupils, but a cool and refreshing feeling pervaded the air. This move is called Sword Energy Eye Cleansing, right? Luo Nan continued to liven up the atmosphere, then he explained, You've seen the structure outside. It's true that it was quite tiring to bring you in this state, but your control is excellent. It's much better than I imagined. Plus, I wanted you to come over for the sake of continuous improvement. Right now we're in the stage of collecting data and endlessly experimenting. Speaking of which, do you understand the structure inside? A little bit. It's really troublesome. You've been injured all this time. That's not the right way to describe it. You should say that the existence of this half-baked domain is a constant burden for me. But you need to see that the benefits inside are enormous. Luo Nan needed to give Ruiwen an explanation of the current background. Have you discovered yet? Right now, the core of the domain I've set up around the dead tree is solid. Even though it's also a sandwich biscuit, it basically continues with the balance that you saw last time. I'm talking about relative balance. But the outer region is something I've set up on the spot. Let's call it virtual reality, for the time being. It's basically pieced together randomly. But there's really no other way. If I don't do this, a lot of messy energy won't be able to leak out. In addition, I need to use this to deceive people. I need to deceive a lot of people. Wen immediately thought of the outer region, the fellow who was entangled in the spider web. It's just one of them. A test subject. I won't go into the details. In short, I've already become the target of public criticism due to my not-so-smart actions this morning. Many people want to pull out my tendons and flay my skin. I definitely can't beat them head-on, so I'm using this method to trick them. Yeah, I'm trying to trick them. You're using this? Wen showed a rare display of straightforward doubt towards Luo Nan. Cough. You can't really win people's trust, right? Right now, it really doesn't look good. The logic is chaotic, the rules are incomplete, and there's even some messy interference of consciousness. Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed. Forcefully integrating them into the void world is really difficult for people. The backlash is also quite fierce. However, we still have opportunities. There are conditions. For example, the recoil is quite sufficient. You've seen your big brother's soul cloak, right? There's also the spider web altar. Right now they're endlessly gathering redundant consciousness resources from the sea of consciousness for my use. They're even extracting energy from the abyss region. But it's very messy. Wen hit the nail on the head. This is just like a large-scale biological brain array in the cloud. I still haven't sorted out the core architecture on my side, and there aren't many usable computing nodes. How many people in this world understand the basic concepts of configuration? Snake tongue, Lu, cat eyes, and a few others aren't very good at it. Speaking of which, you're one of the most important computing nodes. Your little brain is quite clear. The more you understand the situation here, the less worry I'll have. Understand? Wen didn't respond. She just stared at Luo Nan, and there seemed to be specks of light flickering in and out of the depths of her dark pupils. They were like the streams within a deep gorge, occasionally sparkling with light. Chapter 879. Actually, the previous conversation between the two did not affect the progress of Luo Nan's bug catching, for his injuries. They naturally entered a state of concentration similar to that of multi-core parallel processing. They coordinated and mobilized their mental resources to resolve all sorts of problems in an orderly manner. This sort of parallel processing model, simulated by the brain, originated from Dean Wan's secret technique of overall planning. Admittedly, it was an incorporeal mana-consuming skill, but for the current Luo Nan, it just so happened to be able to digest the serious excess of computing power resources. As for how Wen did it, only the devil knew. Everything had been going quite smoothly. But Luo Nan's special focus state was broken when Wen cast her gaze over at this moment. This gaze had already exceeded the scope of what Luo Nan was familiar with. Unfortunately, what existed within wasn't any complicated thoughts. Instead, it was some sort of unique method that followed Wen's own logic. Luo Nan instinctively wanted to analyze it, but he didn't know how to start. This caused the unstable state of his domain to fluctuate once more. For a time, he found it a bit hard to bear. He could only adjust himself and subconsciously talk to himself. Are you wondering why I'm using such a complicated and strenuous method? You're under a lot of pressure. Wen's words were like an arrow piercing his heart. Luo Nan grinned wryly, but he felt unexpectedly good chattering like this. Yeah. Every single one of the people I need to deal with right now have abilities no less than Jin Tong and Gong Qi. I hoodwinked them this morning, but in the end, it was just hoodwinking. Those people have their eyes fixed on the cloud world. No, it's very likely that they're looking at the deeper layers. Even if it's the cloud world, there's no room for them to toss and turn. If I'm exposed, then so be it. I might as well forcefully create one. Isn't this taking things for granted? People have to live under pressure. If I don't take this opportunity to pull my strength up by a chunk, then it will certainly be very unsightly when I return. This is a situation where there is no retreat and only advancement. Looking at it from a different perspective, your big brother has indeed found a shortcut to quickly level up. Wen stared at him. You said before that you shouldn't think of shortcuts when doing things. Cough cough. That's the principle of how people conduct themselves. But if a pie really falls from the sky and smashes into our mouths, we can't spit it out, right? Ruiwen didn't ask what the pie was. She didn't open her mouth any longer. She continued to stare at Luo Nan with her extraordinarily serious and deep gaze. And it was under her observation that the truth, hidden behind layers upon layers of mental and material barriers, appeared one after another. Luo Nan formed a connection with the material void, the sea of consciousness, and even the polar domain of the abyss region at the same time. Regardless of the details, the connection twisted time and space and erased the elements such as distance to the greatest extent. As a result, the vast and complicated domains that he could reach were all deeply or shallowly connected to him. Also, because of the special structure, some sort of depression was formed, which absorbed energy and information from all directions and in all forms endlessly. For example, the torrent of information created and stimulated by the billions of domain fragments in the misty maze had no pattern to speak of. If this was a few days ago, the last time Ruiwen came to the tree hole, Luo Nan would have been drowned in the endless stream of information. And now, the source of information had increased by quite a bit. The amount of information seemed to have grown significantly as well, but Luo Nan seemed to be a lot more relaxed when dealing with it. There was an enormous filtering net that couldn't be distinguished clearly. It wasn't just a single layer, but a complex structure that spanned vertically and horizontally. It covered the entire sea of consciousness and even deeper regions. It lay across the center of the surging torrent of information. It carried out precipitation, filtration, analysis. In the end, some rules were sorted out and transported to the most core region. The core of the filtering net was obviously Luo Nan. To be precise, it was a complex projection based on Luo Nan and related concepts. The projection seemed to be some sort of religious image from the historical knowledge that Ruiwen had recently learned. To put it simply, it was a god. Luo Nan might not have deliberately created this sort of image, but this entire process of absorption, precipitation, and filtration was destined to accumulate into this sort of structure. Ruiwen could trace even further upwards, but it was meaningless. She watched silently, but her line of sight had already reversed. The image cast into the depths of Ruiwen's eyes very faithfully reflected the complex pulse of the present, but it was never a pure reflection of the present. Before, the echoes flowed in the opposite direction, but now they flowed in the direction of the rippling light of the stream in the depths of her eyes. The frequency of the pulse continued to accelerate, exceeding the scope of the present in the blink of an eye. The pulse continued to accelerate and evolve until it completely lost the outline of the present, transforming into a diffuse and decaying still image. And so it came to an end. This isn't good. Ruiwen didn't know why she was seeing such a scene, but the terrible scene at the end forced her to open her mouth and tell Luo Nan. However, her ability to express herself was truly limited. The more anxious she was to describe it, the more she didn't know where to start. Luo Nan saw her open her mouth and frown, and he could guess a few things. But he already had a vein in his mind. Now that he had advanced to this stage, it was just as he said. There was no retreat. It was impossible for his will to waver. So he just laughed. I know that you feel that the layer of virtual reality outside is crooked and twisted. The simulator has failed to update. External database detected. Do you wish to connect? Warning. If external database is connected, some functions of the simulator may be unusable. External database has been connected. The prediction function is 73% complete. Do you wish to start the simulator? The simulator has been activated. Scanning the external environment. No simulator vehicle detected. Please select 1. Thinking training mode. 2. Complete mode. The vehicle can be reassembled with the help of the simulator self-assembly and debugging wizard. Minimum requirements for reassembling the vehicle. Specialization in space-time configuration. Level 2 of the Heavenly Stairway. Chapter 880. Why was it that meat pies fell from the sky? It was fine to just look at the lowest requirements. Of course, this was just a joke. The so-called lowest requirements weren't just specialization in space-time configuration and level 4 of the Heaven Stairway. It was just like how the simulator wasn't just a simulator in the traditional sense. What is this? Ruiwen asked. This was a matter of course. The interface that suddenly popped up and the information window was filled with alien characters. Anyone would be confused. Luo Nan had said before that he needed Rue 1 to understand more about the situation, so there was no need to hide anything. At most, he would omit a few details that would take a lot of effort to explain. You can think of it as the inheritance my parents left behind. No. One of the precious treasures they left behind. Of course, it also belonged to my grandfather. Remember what I told you before? There are many traces on our planet that belong to a certain or even multiple advanced civilizations. Looking at it from the current situation, even though grandfather and mom and dad can't be considered true pioneers, they are extremely powerful discoverers and translators. They excavated many resources that originated from advanced civilizations and transformed them into resources that we can use. The tree-hole space we're in is like this. The mist maze that hasn't been successfully developed is like this. The virtual brain system you see right now is also like this. You can't understand the characters on it, right? There's nothing I can do about it. It's an alien language. Speaking of which, the virtual brain system is far too complex. I haven't completely understood it yet, so I won't go into details for now. Right now, all you need to know is that I just activated a new function from within. It's extremely useful for the current situation. Rue 1 was the best listener. She didn't utter a single word during Luo Nan's long speech. She just listened attentively and watched attentively. It was as if Luo Nan was the only person in the world. There was no need to doubt that she would miss a single shred of information. Luo Nan gestured to Rue 1 to shift her gaze from his face to the projection area. The virtual brain interface. The central virtual brain galaxy had a structure of millions and millions of stars. It was very complex and dazzling. The outer satellites, especially the exoskeleton system that represented personal equipment, also involved many layers of explanation. Luo Nan just skimmed over them. Luo Nan's fingertips and Rue 1's line of sight finally fell upon another satellite, which was the outer space flying ship. A few days ago, the lonely dark body of the starship had simply circled around the central virtual brain galaxy, in silence. No matter how hard it was stimulated, there was no response. But when Luo Nan passed the 100-year sequence general education test, as well as the additional offline test. Perhaps more importantly, after Luo Nan made contact with the Sunwheel Hell in the distant deep space and experienced the baptism of its flood of information, the unreadable state of this satellite was gone forever. At this moment, although the spaceship in outer space was still dark and lifeless, a certain area in the middle of the spaceship was electrified. The light in the area was passing through some of the portholes on the spaceship, turning into fragments of different shapes and flowing out. Amidst the twinkling lights, a relatively complete functional area appeared. The reflection of it. Oh, this area appears to be mini and empty, but it is actually operating normally. Although I can't see its internal structural components too clearly, it is still extremely precise and tight as a whole. It may be illusory, but the way it operates is real. It belongs to the reality of the material world. It's a virtual physical system. Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts linked with the external neuron, driving the image on the projection to enlarge endlessly, focusing on the sole light source of the spaceship in outer space. As his cultivation continued to rise, the precision of his perception and control over this area continued to rise as well. From a visual perspective, they were like two astronauts walking in space or ghosts floating in the starry sky. They approached the spaceship in outer space ceaselessly and then seeped inside. This area within the spaceship wasn't too spacious compared to the overall structure. The environmental layout was also relatively simple. There was only a single piece of integrated equipment that occupied an area of about 10 square meters. All that was left were the corners. The integrated equipment was like a large beetle lying on the ground, with its head and tail cut off. At the relatively wide front was an arc-shaped interface. Right now, it flickered with the radiance of information. Large amounts of text and diagrams, as well as the constantly switching map and various non-optical imaging effects, made all of this exude a lifelike professional style. Perhaps at this very moment, in a certain corner of the universe, there was such a piece of equipment. It was controlled by some bizarre intelligent life form, carrying out its functions and missions. Luo Nan constantly fine-tuned the angle of the projection. He was like a photographer, deliberately creating an immersive feeling. Right now, he and Rue 1 stood at the top of the treehole space. Behind them was the lens and the surrounding nebula. and in front of them was the enormous piece of equipment, even though it only existed within the mini spaceship of the virtual brain system. Luo Nan was the operator. He had already found the relevant content from the large manual of the virtual brain system. Even though it was a bit too simple, he was still brimming with confidence after studying it seriously and putting it into practice. He demonstrated it in front of Rue 1. To put it bluntly, this is a simulator. Frost River reality. No, it's closer to the burner simulator, or the simulation effect of the psychic wave network. After all, you're separated by a layer. At most, you're watching a 3D movie. But in my perception, it's already quite realistic. Luo Nan erased the original image on the front interface of the device as he spoke. After a few jumps, an even simpler and clearer pure text interface appeared. There were many options and their corresponding explanations. Luo Nan translated for Rue 1. Truth be told, using the secret text of the word me, to sense it was impossible for him to be confident and elegant. He could only make do with it. This is the level selection page of the simulator. There are a total of 4 options. Each one corresponds to a different level and mode. However, they aren't in the simulator. They're in the simulator itself. First, we need to understand one thing. Even though we're looking at a simulated simulator, it's only simulating one of the simulator's forms. To be more precise, it's the lowest form. Do you understand? Rue thought for a bit. She extended her finger and tapped on the simulator interface in the virtual projection area. There was a column of text at the very top. If you choose this option, it will be a beetle. If you choose another option, it will have a different appearance. This is the principle. It's like a transformer, but it's tens of thousands of times more complicated. Luo Nan extended his hand to touch Rue Wen's finger. He tapped on the first option as well. I named this option Brain in a Jar, in accordance with Earth's language habits. Chapter 881. Just listening to this name is enough. As for the effects, I just said it. There's no essential difference from the ones on Earth. It's just a mechanical instrument. It builds a limited space. In the extreme, you just need to soak a person's brain inside. It mainly targets the body and soul framework of humans or other higher intelligent life forms, especially the brain and nervous system. Through electrical signals and other stimuli, it deceives the sensory neurons and creates a fake environment for people. Of course, it suffers from many restrictions. Even if it uses digital technology to construct a virtual physical system, it will only be an imitation of the local laws of space and time. In essence, it is only an illusion that acts on the brain. Some even require the active cooperation of the participants. It's clearly impossible to use this model in actual combat. At the very least, I have no way to install a virtual helmet on the heads of extraordinaries. Luo Nan said a cold joke, but Rue Wen didn't know how to cooperate. Her expression was serious but calm. Ahem, but the advantage of this emulator is that it's a relatively good editing tool. As long as there's enough data, as long as the data is sufficient, the computing power is sufficient, and there's also the power supply. It can edit a very good setting and even a script. It can create a virtual Earth or even the universe. Theoretically, it is feasible. On a smaller scale, it can be used for ordinary games and training. On a larger scale, it can be used as a higher-level simulator to perform deep calculations and deductions. The most important thing is that if there is a script that has already been edited by someone before, it can be stored and used on the spot. Luo Nan extended a finger and soon brought up the front interface. He brought up the image of a certain planet that he had personally experienced. It was the background setting of the offline test question. This script is quite amazing. It's extremely close to reality. It belongs to the reality of that higher civilization. It can be used as a reference, but it's just a reference. It can't be used alone. The plot of the exam script is too obvious. It doesn't seem like a normal plane waiting to be excavated. Luckily, there are many choices within the downloaded offline test module. I need to synthesize them. Rue Wen knew that the reference Luo Nan spoke of was referring to the misty haze-like projection illusions outside. The elements were quite complex. It looked like Luo Nan had already begun experimenting in this area, but the results weren't clear. Luo Nan could see part of Rue Wen's thoughts. He continued to explain awkwardly, "There's really nothing I can do about it. My sandwich domain was created by compressing and piecing everything together. It wasn't easy for me to achieve a balance, but that was only an approximate solution in an ideal situation. It's just like the mathematics questions you're learning now. The formulas and constants used are all limited to practice and exam conditions. They don't take into account the real parameters of the material world. Don't expect to come up with anything convincing on this basis. However, if we don't care about the authenticity of the material plane, its settings are quite sufficient. The one outside, Captain Jimmy, is currently trapped in the script. I've even mixed a lot of elements into it. Coincidentally, he's implanted a very high-level dynamo core, so he can help test it out. The prey that was trapped in the spider's web and sleeping very lightly? Ruewen understood. She looked seriously at Luonan and nodded seriously. Luonan couldn't help but extend his hand to stroke the little girl's hair. He enjoyed the smooth sensation of her hair, and at the same time he justified himself. The current situation is much better. I can utilize an extremely abundant amount of computing power resources. I can optimize things from before. But it's still a domain after all. I can casually optimize and reorganize it. If something goes wrong, I won't even have time to cry. That's why I need to find a simulator first. The circle outside, aside from being used to deceive people, is also used for this purpose. Oh, low-end ones won't do. Let's continue. Luonan didn't linger on this topic. His fingertips repositioned the front interface and slid down to the second topic. Let's call this topic space-time fault, for the time being if we translate it. The materials used for this simulator are quite high-end. I still don't really understand it, and I can't translate it well. It's probably called space-time silhouette? But we have a ready-made example. Do you still remember? You were sleeping at the time, but you should have heard many people talk about it. It's President Ouyang's logic world. Ruewen nodded slightly. She really did hear people talk about it. At the time, Ouyang Chen intercepted a certain crowded commercial center area of Xia City. He drew a boundary, separated space and time, and formed a world of his own. In one fell swoop, ability users and ordinary citizens were separated, and he thwarted the terrifying actions of a crazy first oblatum of the Order of Justice. Although the enemy Ouyang Chen dealt with at the time couldn't be considered a true powerhouse, this sort of method was still one of the most astonishing and absolutely brilliant performances since the era of distortion. Let's say, all streams return to the origin. President Ouyang's logic world can be said to echo with a simulator of this level. Even though the specific methods and applications are different, the core train of thought is relatively the same. It mainly targets the structure of space and time itself. Through a precise grasp of the local laws of space and time, and of course, there's also the extremely powerful bidirectional interference force and interference techniques on the mental and material planes to extract a certain silhouette fragment of the entirety of space and time to construct a world that originates from reality, yet surpasses reality. Back then, Luonan had watched the entire process in a pure observation mode. Now that he was talking excitedly, he wanted to use the external domain environment to construct the structure of the logic world from back then. He wanted to recreate the battlefield at Frost River Reality's flagship store. As expected, it was burnt before it could take shape. This time, Luonan wasn't embarrassed. The degree of rigor of the logic world structure, and the inconceivable details filled in under this rigor. Even though Luonan's experience had increased by 1,000 times, he had never seen a second logic world like this. President Ouyang was able to accomplish this. Aside from his profound attainments, he relied to a considerable degree on the psychic wave network that covered Xia City. He also relied on a high-precision grasp of the network's coverage environment. It was impossible to successfully recreate the logic world based purely on impressions. Plus, although the logic world was good, it wasn't practical for Luonan. Consumption is one aspect. Due to this method, what is intercepted is an instantaneous fragment of the local spacetime, forming a fault. The logic world itself is affected by the interference of space and time. The structure's space and the time it can be maintained are limited. I've heard you mention that President Ouyang normally uses this method to conduct some relatively dangerous experiments or to conduct some short-term simulations and deductions. This is the effect of a simulator. But to be honest, Using it to deceive people isn't too easy. Ru Awen nodded in approval. Luo Nan's finger slid to the third option. Dang 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 dang. Here comes the important point. For this option, let's call it making something out of nothing for the time being. Ah no, let's call it a rule puzzle. Chapter 882. Luo Nan continued to follow the order of interpretation from before. After translating the options, he pointed out the materials used for this level of the simulator. This is easier to translate. It says that the raw materials used for processing are the space and time we reside in itself. Hee. Even though he had already experienced it once, suddenly speaking such big words gave him a very reckless feeling. Ruewen didn't laugh. She had an appearance that made sense. Luo Nan felt that he couldn't stay calm anymore. He could only cough once to wipe away the awkwardness that had arisen once more. He also maintained his elder brother's dignity and continued to operate on the front interface. Luo Nan was different from just pointing at the first two items. He opened the third item's secondary interface. The first item was densely packed with explanatory text. There were a few complex diagrams mixed within. There were also formulas and the like. Luo Nan had already researched this before. The large sections of explanatory text here weren't very friendly to a half-baked translator like him. They also exposed his shortcomings in the area of pure theory. This wasn't something that could be made up for in a short period of time. So he quickly skipped over it and entered the more complex, continuously changing, and completely unfixed graphical interface. What you see right now and what I perceive in the system are actually two different things. Just like how the material world we see is not the same thing as true existence. I can use my mental senses in the system to capture even more dimensional structures. What appears before our eyes is just a projection of one end of the complex structure of space and time. You should understand this. Ruewen really did understand. Her intuition regarding the structure of space and time even surpassed Luo Nan's. She was able to estimate the approximate, panoramic view, after looking at one end for a long time. Inside, it was a mess. Luo Nan was immersed in this chaotic scene. He was even a bit intoxicated. A three-dimensional lifeform possessed a pseudo-three-dimensional vision structure and an illusory spatial imagination. Only a character like Luo Nan, who possessed an extremely powerful mental sensibility, could view the structure of space and time with this material foundation. The more he could do it, the more he could feel the endless mysteries and beauty within. A direct observation of the structure of space and time. Just this sort of simulation is already a huge gain. Luo Nan's attainments in the configuration of space and time could already be applied to actual combat. He had gone through the 100-year sequence and the additional questions to verify that he had indeed reached a considerable level. However, the anatomical diagram, presented in the simulator, was still quite shocking. Every time he observed and sensed it, he would have a brand new experience. In comparison, the real local space and time was so vast that there was no end to it. The mist maze, on the other hand, was too broken. That was just a simulation. What kind of splendid scene would it be if the real space and time were dissected into this? Yes, in order to create the simulator, the basic requirement is to dissect the local space-time, cut the complete space-time into suitable materials, and reassemble it with a method of configuration, changing the rules and laws. In fact, once it is cut, it is the change of nature and all kinds of changes are contained within. Luo Nan spoke of these things as if he were cutting a cake. However, time and space were ever-changing, and the laws were hazy. It was hard to change. It was not some plasticine that could be molded however one wanted. One had to have the awareness of competing with the vast universe. Even someone as strong as President Ouyang had to rely on the foundation of the psychic wave network, utilizing multiple conditions on the mental and material planes to realize the masterpiece of the logic world. For instance, the powerful thought process of erasing the old rules and scribbling new rules required the support of a powerful bidirectional interference force between the material and the material plane, an extremely brilliant interference technique, and a space-time configuration design ability that far exceeded the standard. No matter how enormous Luo Nan's accumulated soul strength was, no matter how much power the altar's spiderweb had, it was impossible to forcefully bend the local space and time to complete a precise configuration. This was despite the fact that the simulator guide already had the basic blueprints and operating procedures. But he had indeed found a shortcut by using such a relaxed tone. He didn't need to forcefully distort, cut, or dissect the structure of spacetime because he had substitute materials. He had an inexhaustible supply of them. We have the mist maze. Luo Nan's voice seemed to be refracted and reverberated within the trillions of domain fragments. These fragments are a bit finer, but they are essentially no different from the structure of spacetime. I can completely use the sandwich domain to infiltrate and guide them in. Not only can I arrange and combine them at will, but the rejection is also extremely low. As long as I have patience, I can form something from nothing, from small to large. When pieced together bit by bit, I can completely form my own unique rules of spacetime. He even gave an example in order to increase his persuasiveness. For instance, the 70 Format Research Institute. Wasn't my mother piecing together bits and pieces of domain fragments? Of course, she should have done some dimensionality reduction processing. The area she assembled isn't a particularly standard structure of spacetime. There's a bit of a discontinuity to it. But there are many details that are worthy of in-depth research. We need to properly refer to them. Those thieves only took away the equipment, but they left the most valuable wealth in place. They can't take it away, right? Luonan didn't wait for Rue 1 to respond. His eyes sparkled, and he spoke faster and faster. There's also that Luo Yuan, the fellow who claims to have some secret dealings with the goddess of fate. Even though he didn't admit it, there's a 99% chance that he's in the depths of the mist maze. It's also possible that we haven't explored the edge zone yet. He monopolized a domain fragment with an enormous volume, becoming the capital for his fortune. We don't need to evaluate his luck and methods, but we can completely learn from them. Who knows how long it'll take to piece together a dimension that everyone is satisfied with. But if we have a better foundation, have a deeper understanding, and then make up for it, won't the efficiency be greatly increased? Luo Nan had already pondered over this idea 1,000 times in his mind. His train of thought was already extremely clear. All of this was built upon his control over the mist maze. It was precisely with the mist maze and his mother's research notes that he was able to start with the most basic configuration and experience the marvels of spacetime configuration. And the deeper he grasped this technique, the stronger his control over the mist maze became. From this, an unstoppable virtuous cycle was formed. This was the precious wealth his parents had left him. It was something he would never be able to fully use in his lifetime. Luo Nan never believed that he was some sort of genius. Most of his current accomplishments were built upon the foundation of his grandfather and his parents' generous gifts. He understood this point clearly, and at the same time, he had more reason to utilize this wealth to the extreme. Luo Nan pulled Rue 1 to turn around to look at the surroundings of the lens. There was a ring of fluctuating nebula that was faintly fluctuating. The flashes of the stars seemed to become exceptionally bright and clear within the glowing mist. Chapter 883. Rue 1 understood without Luo Nan needing to explain. As mentioned before, although the lens was the main body, the most core creation, every shining star in the surrounding nebula was a rarely seen creation of the laws of the misty labyrinth. They were all marked with relatively large structures. Picking out the cornerstone fragments from within was undoubtedly the most efficient choice. Sure enough, Luo Nan spread his arms wide and used rather exaggerated movements to gather this incorporeal glowing mist. Next, we need to explore between these stars and find a suitable home. Rue 1 let out a light, yep, in response. Perhaps if Luo Nan was a bit colder, Luo Nan wouldn't need to take out such exaggerated actions to tease a child. Maybe he would go from bad to worse. It was rare for Rue 1 to be a bit absent-minded. When she turned her gaze back, she saw that Luo Nan was already switching interfaces, preparing to enter the substantive program. Could she have missed something? Then what about the fourth item? The fourth item. Oh, I forgot to mention it. Luo Nan's expression was a bit downcast. But there's nothing much to say. It's not that it's not important. It's just that we don't need it for now. I call this item the celestial landscape. You can say that I'm using Grandpa's formatting theory as a footnote. Many of the basic theories inside are related to the interaction between heaven and earth and the self-format. It should have a corresponding relationship with the extraordinary domain that we're used to talking about. It's just that I didn't explain it too clearly. The corresponding simulators are all auxiliary designs, but the requirements to use them are off the charts. I haven't studied them thoroughly yet. Ruiwen let out an "oh," and didn't say anything else. Just at this time, a window of information belonging to the virtual brain system popped up on the current interface. It made a new notification, and Ruiwen saw it. There's news. It's about data loading. Oh, the progress is quite fast. The efficiency of the cloud biological brain array is exploding. The meaning of the new notification was roughly as follows. Sequence 1 data loading complete. Automatically loading sequence 2. Completed low-end network preloading. Officially loading in progress. Luonan knew that the so-called sequence 1 was the data related to the sun-wheel hell that had settled within the spiderweb. An enormous amount of information and noise were mixed together. Luonan tossed and turned for several days, but the analysis progress was still extremely slow. But Luonan erected a statue of a god atop the altar's spiderweb, realizing the integration. Under the support of powerful computing power, the progress bar was pulled to the bottom in the dozen or so hours. As for sequence 2, Luonan recalled earnestly for a moment before remembering. This was from the disciple of veteran hand, Wu Li. Luonan had linked the question board in his hands to a certain data center in Ban City. Luonan had finally collected this information. The source should be a part of a large data collection project of a large power. In the modern information society, this type of database also had an explosive amount of information. It was time to make good use of it. Sequence 2 data loading complete. How many seconds? 2. Luonan was a bit stupefied. The difference in mass. Did it need to be that obvious? Of course, from the information provided by the system, the external neuron had already been downloaded from the data center before it was officially loaded with sequence 2's information. It was likely that the external neuron had already copied the entire set and was only now officially loading the analysis. This avoided the limitations of the Earth-level data center hardware, and with intelligent, idle operation, it created a stunning effect. But no matter what, Luonan was reminded by the intuitive comparison of over 100 hours and 2 seconds. Compared to the flood of data from the Sun-Wheel Extreme Prison, the reserves of the Earth-level data center were on a completely different level. The Sun-Wheel hell was impossible to quantify, but Sequence 2's massive amount of data allowed Luonan to estimate an approximate value range. Using this reasoning, Luonan seemed to have underestimated the computing power gathered by the altar spiderweb and the ability level of the brain array formed from it. This kind of ability really exceeded his expectations. 5 days ago, the Wraith sign pulled the altar spiderweb with the help of the daytime nightmare. It planted a hint in the subconscious of billions of living beings across the globe that were affected, establishing a connection. Luonan never asked for it, nor did he expect it to do anything through this connection. He just allowed it to exist and be used. But when Luonan and the true god and pope of the Amaterasu order battled across space, creating a scene of a falling sun and a fortress in the clouds, Luonan's weight in the entire system immediately increased by tens of thousands of times. A flash of light turned into an echo. Among these billions of living beings, the telepathic responses of the hundreds of thousands of ability users, who had already climbed to higher levels of the evolutionary tree, had already caused considerable interference to Luonan. For the sake of sorting out the chaotic echoes and not affecting his own state, Luonan used his own perfect body as a standard to establish the image of a god. This was tantamount to establishing rules for the altar spiderweb. Since then, Luonan's chaotic expression had directional feedback, and the brain array of the brain array in the cloud had set up its basic structure. There was, without a doubt, a great deal of potential to be excavated within. Luonan's statue of God only supported the most basic of feedback. It was just as he said to Ruiwen. He didn't even understand the core structure, let alone anything else. Luonan was able to realize a leap in computing power. On one hand, it was abundant to the point of overflowing computing power. It was similar to an exhaustive method, forcefully piling up efficiency. On the other hand, the altar spiderweb led by the Wraith sign and the external neuron planted deep within the brain seemed to possess a basic framework for utilizing this resource. Luonan was at best a person who used tools. This was great. It wasn't like Luonan truly viewed himself as an omniscient and omnipotent god. He had domains that he was good at. Of course, he had domains that he wasn't good at. For the latter, the most practical consideration was obviously to utilize tools. The sudden increase in harvests did not disturb Luo Nan's established train of thought. Instead, it raised his expectations a step further. He had wanted to experience the large data processing capabilities of the virtual brain system. Now was the time. Luo Nan's fingertips swiped across the interface in front of him. He did not directly enter the rule jigsaw puzzle. Instead, he first clicked on the brain in a jar. Before developing a large construction project, he needed to make a solid design blueprint. After a series of operations on the secondary interface, the simulator of simulations gave feedback. Do you want to activate automatic editing mode? The simulator we are using right now is actually a virtual machine. Calculations on the pure data level are not needed. The external neuron is already hard enough. Let's begin now. Luo Nan's mouth did not stop. It was as if he was reminding Rue Wen, but it was also as if he was encouraging himself. Then, he clicked on the virtual button without a doubt, entering brain in a jar's automatic editing mode. The interface suddenly went black, but soon, glimmering text and information appeared section by section. Model, Inner Universe. Version number. Great Sovereign Level Basic Exploration Model 2. 7. Authorized Production Department. Heavenly Abyss Empire's 17th Equipment Department. Authorization Time Limit. Permanent. To explore the gap. To pay for shame. To live for the past. Zhang Yong. Who was Zhang Yong? Luo Nan could only guess that this was a name. He should be a character of great status in this high-level civilization. It was just that his words were a bit dull. The automatic editing mode settings came one after another without waiting for Luo Nan to ponder further. Unable to connect to the Heavenly Abyss Spirit Network. A valid data source has been discovered. Do you want to automatically import external data? Luo Nan, who had already read through the relevant instructions, did not even think. He simply clicked, Confirm. Chapter 884. It was the 12th of May in Ban City. This day seemed especially long. In the eyes of relevant people, this day had been divided into many events from morning to night. Ever since the Fusong Divine Tree System covered Ban City, experts from all walks of life took turns. There was no need to mention people like the Pope and Mr. M.O. There was also a high-level extraordinary-level conference. Including the observers, there were close to 100 participants, and any one of them was a big shot. Normally, these participants would be the focus of attention and analysis by various intelligence agencies. Intelligence personnel would hate to stare at their crotches and see the color and quantity of their farts. But today, the vast majority of people here were just there to cheer the crowd, but they still couldn't be underestimated. There was a huge amount of information, but it was also mixed with a huge amount of noise, forming a huge amount of data that tormented all kinds of professional intelligence analysts. Many intelligence agencies around the world were prepared to work until they died. It couldn't be helped. It was better than making a wrong judgment and causing a world war. In comparison, Deep Blue and the Apocalypse Laboratory, hidden in a certain region of the Deep Blue world, had their own intelligence analysis team. They were willing to spend money, and they had the advantage of being the first contact that others couldn't get. But they also spent the most effort on this. It had been 15 hours since Mr. M.O. left the public site. The analysis team that had been temporarily assembled by the two laboratories was still working intensely. Bald Jeff gulped down his 5th cup of coffee, stepped on an electric hoverbike, and temporarily left the research lab. No one cared about his actions or whereabouts. In the face of heavy analysis and research work, even raising their heads was a burden they couldn't bear. Jeff didn't go too far. He randomly found a communications room that could communicate with Earth spacetime. He didn't care if he was being monitored or not. He just turned on the Transworld communication system, and soon, a 3-way communication was established. The projection showed the upper body of a person. On Jeff's left was Director Mao, who had appeared at the extraordinary conference. He was the spokesperson of Quantum Corporation in the inner world. And on his right was his biggest financial backer, Wang Yu. She was the head of a certain great clan with unfathomable influence in the political, military, and business world. She was the head of the Jade Review Association. Although Bald Jeff was the leader of the Deep Blue Laboratory and had always been arrogant, compared to these two, there was an insurmountable gap in status. There was an insurmountable gap in status between the two of them. The only thing he could do was to adopt a businesslike attitude and report the latest situation. The current situation is intermittent, but there are still signals coming through. The accumulation of information was quite effective. Currently, they were trying to reconstruct the possible environment of the other side based on the feedback of the signal. They were also trying to determine the relative position. No one knows if it's real or not. At the end of the day, distinguishing between the real and the fake is the most important thing. I think that if we want to figure out where the new plane is, we should ask that Mr. Mo directly. That way we can have a straightforward answer. As he spoke, Jeff couldn't help but mutter a lot of things. He expressed his opinion, but his words were also mixed with emotion. Neither Wang Yu nor Chairman Mao answered Jeff's complaints. Instead, they asked after digesting the relevant information. The one who asked the question was Director Mao, who was still dressed in a flowery shirt. His question was slightly more radical. Do you have a basic judgment of the intersection of time and space? I mean Levi, what was his judgment? Band City? North or south of the coastline? Land or sea? I didn't hear any judgment. No. Director Mao narrowed his eyes. The bloodline and the excavation mission are his treasures. He can't wait to fill them with resources. Everything is laid out in front of him. Why isn't he saying anything? Bald Jeff shrugged. I haven't seen him for 7 or 8 hours. Last time, it seemed like he was still paying attention to Xia City. I'm not too clear about the specifics. Xia City. Director Mao muttered. On the other side, Wang Yu just smiled, watching Director Mao and Jeff communicate. Director Mao relied on his understanding of Li Wei to make a judgment. Circling around Xia City all the time. Is his attitude conservative, or does he have a plan? No one answered him. Director Mao wasn't here to perform a one-man show. He pulled Wang Yu along, ignoring the surveillance, and opened a cross-border communication channel. In addition to understanding the information, he also needed to have a clear attitude. So, he suddenly changed the topic. He didn't even care about the awkwardness. Speaking of having a plan, Wang Yu, you're taking your time. Are you still planning to hold the high seas auction? Wang Yu was still smiling, but her tone was very certain. Of course. There are even more people looking forward to it. Really? Mr. Mo can't figure it out. From Luo Nan's perspective, there might be unexpected harvests. Quite a few people think so. Luo Nan. It's time to mull things over. Also, Director Mao, your extraordinary conference played beautifully with the adjournment, but it stifled people quite badly. I heard that quite a few people believe that the conference will resume on the day of the auction. They can invite the parties involved to have a detailed discussion face-to-face. Perhaps they can reach an agreement on cooperation on the spot. Director Mao laughed. It's also possible that a world war will break out on the spot. That's why it's in the high seas region. No. It's too close to my vacation island. Wang Yu made small talk. This is a major event related to the new plane. Director Mao, it's unjustifiable for you to hold the idea of staying out of it. It seemed like a casual conversation, but it involved an extremely serious core. As for how serious it was, the two people participating in the conversation had different understandings. Director Mao also made small talk. He led the change of topic. Speaking of the new plane, there's also Xia City. I've reminded you. There's a matter. Oh. Wang Yu maintained her smile. A sudden inspiration would not appear so openly in this kind of conversational setting. The other party must be referring to something. Sure enough, Director Mao soon snapped his fingers. Your side recently funded a research project. I think it's called something called Comparison of Aberrant Ecology. The preliminary conclusion is quite eye-catching. Aberrant ecology? Wang Yu pondered for a moment and nodded. There's something like that. However, I'm just one of the natural sponsors. I'm a private investor. On the other hand, Quantum Corporation is the institutional sponsor. The ratio is quite impressive. I'm not sure about that. Why don't you tell me about it? Wang Yu's smile deepened. The specific content is a comparative study of the ecology of the volcanic region southwest of Spring City and the wilderness surrounding Xia City. The research itself is fine, but the most eye-catching part is that a bold conjecture was made on the basis of the research. I'm not sure if the conjecture can be verified or not, but it's very much in line with my common sense and aesthetics. It's just as the beautiful lady who gave the report said. A wheel, a giant wheel, has rolled over the space-time we are in. The rear wheel is in Spring City. The front wheel, Xia City, has already heard the sound of thunder. Chapter 885. Wang Yu used poetic language to describe it, but he was calmly assessing in his heart. Someone deliberately leaked the news. Just as all the extraordinaries in the world were rubbing their hands in anticipation of the new plane, someone finally began to exert their strength in front of the stage and behind the scenes, trying to guide the direction of the matter. He could even roughly guess who it was. Related to the comparative study of aberrant ecology, it was likely a sponsor like him, paying attention to and promoting it for a long time, doing a lot of homework in advance. Therefore, only by releasing the news now could they win people's trust. Even a strong-willed person like Director Mao was in a state of doubt. At this time, Director Mao thought of another story. Spring City. Many things have happened in Spring City in the past 6 months. Even someone as reclusive as Li Wei can't stay calm. I heard someone stole a uterine fibroid, which is like stealing his elixir. Wang Yu simply answered, I've heard of it. That seems to be where Jin Buhuan perished. To be precise, it's the southwest volcanic area. It's a few 100 kilometers away, and it's just missing. A sensitive area. Director Mao stared at Wang Yu, and Wang Yu looked back at Director Mao. They were both pondering each other's thoughts. In the end, Director Mao got straight to the point. Speaking of which, Luo Yuandao's laboratory is very close to that place. That's always been their active area. It seems that young Master Wang already has a direction? As I said, this is more in line with my common sense and aesthetics. Wang Yu also put on a frank attitude. A plane that's extremely close to us will always have some contact with us for a period of time, more or less, and not just appear in everyone's greedy dreams. Director Mao clapped his hands in admiration, the hairs on his arms trembling. Now that's a solid attitude. Now that I think about it, the so-called new plane for the past 6 months wasn't just a dream. So, what does young Master Wang plan to do next? Cooperation. Cooperation that can quickly get results. Wang Yu looked like he knew everything. Director Mao, and Quantum Corporation, what are your considerations? Considerations? Are you talking about those greedy shareholders or the brain-dead board of directors? After a pause, separated by a distance of several thousand kilometers, the two looked at each other and laughed. There was no other reason than that these two people, or at least the two parties involved, were both brain-dead members of Quantum Corporation's board of directors. The equity structure of a public company such as Quantum Corporation was far too complicated, and it had to be complicated. It was one of the largest organizations in the world, and it was distributed in the hands of thousands of large and small institutions, as well as countless private investors. Even if 88 isolated cities floating on the Earth's crust were a little strenuous to support a globalized environment, political, economic, military, and historical factors had determined that such an attitude was necessary. Of course, the result of the complicated equity structure was that the leading power of the board of directors was greatly increased. External directors with huge connections and influence, as representatives of various forces, entered the board of directors, forming a kind of loose interest group, harmonious but different, fighting but not breaking. Of course, the board of directors had also been renewed and replaced over the past few decades. In the end, those who were seriously unsociable were eliminated and a relatively stable governance structure was formed. Quantum Holdings definitely had a basic standpoint. Even if it was vague, it would always stand firmly on the side of the world's advantageous side, steadily seizing the benefits. With a successful example before them, Director Mao and Wang Yu brought up the discussion mode of Quantum Corporation's board of directors. Cooperation is the correct choice. Everyone here isn't a child protecting their food. As long as there is compromise, there will be a basis for cooperation. As long as the first step is taken, there will be a first step. Even if it's a deliberate lie, there will always be elements of truth within. But many people think highly of themselves and prefer to settle things in one step. There are also people who don't recognize the logic of adults. Having said this, Director Mao recalled a certain piece of information. There really is a child among the collaborators. And quite a few intelligence agencies believe that he has a tendency that isn't too good. Regardless of whether Wang Yu knew or not, she had to put on an interested attitude. You're talking about Luo Nan, right? What do you mean? It said that this person, Luo Nan, has a tendency of thinking that makes simple problems complicated and complex problems modular. He hopes to be able to use a kind of universal solution to solve these types of problems. This doesn't conform to the reality of doing things, and bugs will frequently appear. But we have to pay attention to one possibility. With his talent and special ability, he really can find a kind of universal solution in the vast majority of situations, even if it's only universal to him. If this is the case, then it will be quite troublesome. A capricious theorist. The kind that can distort reality. Wang Yu concluded. Then she laughed. Generally speaking, this kind of person often ends up being kicked out of the board of directors. But that also requires a period of running in and confirmation. Before that, I have to lure them in first. This is the way I like to handle things. Me too. Bald Jeff listened to these topics full of ambiguity, misdirection, and hints. He couldn't help but yawn. There was no doubt that the two people in the current conversation had deliberately mixed too much noise into their semantic information. Matters that could have been clearly explained had to be packaged into encrypted data packets, using experience and logic to guess and analyze. Their goal was to use the smallest price to pry for the greatest benefit. They were already people with wealth that could rival a country. Was there any point in doing this? Bald Jeff once again gave a thumbs up for his career choice. At this time, the latest news from the analysis room was transmitted. He raised his hand. There's a new situation over there. I'm going back. There's a change. There's one more set of data that needs to be analyzed. Preliminary judgment is that it involves the authority request of Jimmy's internal dynamo core, MD-11 type. It's related to information retrieval. It's not a small discovery. Seeing the reaction of the two, Bald Jeff quickly understood and explained. In layman's terms, we have reason to suspect that Jimmy is in an area with a relatively complex external environment. Its built-in database is no longer able to adapt to the relevant elements of the scene. Therefore, according to the corresponding mechanism, it will automatically request information support from the Apocalypse Array. Director Mao asked with interest. In other words, by referring to the data transferred by the Apocalypse Array, we can simulate the space-time environment that Jimmy is in? First, we have to wash the data clean. He doesn't have the conditions for cross-border communication like we do. It was Yan Yonghua who amplified the feedback response of the formatting domain to the main axis, and only then was he able to barely collect it. Moreover, it's already seriously distorted. It won't be easy to strip out effective information. After a pause, Jeff pursed his lips. Moreover, the identification of authenticity is a very important prerequisite. On the other hand, the Apocalypse Lab is still full of confidence in the 7th-generation Dynamo core. Or perhaps, they think that even if it's a dream, they can still peel out the real stuff. Having said that, Bald Jeff felt that his scientific work had been carried out. He waved his hand and was about to leave. Just before he cut off the communication, he suddenly thought of something and turned to Wang Yu. Send me a copy of that comparative research on aberrant ecology paper. Chapter 886. The arrow of time pressed forward courageously. Every instant it passed through was the accumulation of endless changes. It already exceeded the limits of the imagination of ordinary people. Even with Luo Nan's current strength, he could only feel disturbances that were nearly faintly discernible and illusory. Most of the time, he had to wait for the changes to accumulate to a certain degree and compare them with the nodes in front of him. Only then would he be able to see the main veins within. Over 10 hours passed, and he did a few things. Even the external environment, whether it was the howling mist maze of the sandstorm or the tree-hole space he worked hard to manage, didn't have too obvious of a change. But for the simulator, which was purely made up of data, it already had the meaning of splitting the heavens and splitting the earth, of transforming all living things. However, Luo Nan was more or less dissatisfied as he stared at the main interface of the simulator and studied the various parameters. Greedy for perfection. This isn't easy. It must be said that the amount of information Luo Nan absorbed and precipitated from the Sun Wheel Absolute Domain at the risk of exploding was extremely considerable. At the same time, the external neuron's large data processing ability was outstanding. With the support of these two, the Senior Sovereign Level Basic Exploration Model 2.7 Innerverse Simulator displayed its outstanding design performance. Ever since it activated its automatic editing mode, it had already formed dazzling results. Luo Nan was dazzled to the point where he couldn't help but sigh. Not ideal. Rui Wen's voice suddenly rang in his ear, giving Luo Nan a shock. He turned his head and saw that the little girl's expression was normal. He was just about to let out a sigh of relief when he saw that the clothes on her shoulders and waist had been torn. It was unknown how, but her jade-like skin was revealed. Fortunately, there were no wounds. What's going on? The relationship between fragment number 2 and its surroundings is a bit complicated. I was careless when I cut in. That one shouldn't be too suitable. It was rare for Rui Wen to say such a long sentence. She was mostly defending herself. Clearly, she didn't want Luo Nan to worry. Luo Nan's eyebrows furrowed. Rui Wen was undoubtedly the best assistant when searching and scouting the mist maze. The little girl was able to freely enter and exit this chaotic region that didn't possess any basic space-time structure. It was thanks to her guidance that Luo Nan was able to enter. Even now, Luo Nan's understanding of the mist maze environment seemed to be inferior to Rui Wen's. Therefore, the early-stage reconnaissance mission of finding the foundation stone of the virtual plane was given to Rui Wen. This was much more detailed than the long-distance observation of the lens. But if the little girl was too reckless and something really happened to her, he wouldn't be able to redeem himself even if he died 10,000 times. Luo Nan thought over and over again, but he still chose a more conservative method. You can be a scout, but don't get too close. Actually, I'll have to see for myself whether or not you'll be able to enter those fragments. But I'll adjust the focal length of the lens and then attempt to land in the tree hole space as a whole. I'll have to do this sooner or later, and you'll have to help me connect it. I can still do it. Rui Wen hooked her finger on the torn seam of her clothes and frowned slightly. These are all burdens. Stop. Luo Nan was afraid that Rui Wen would be in a bad mood and simply tear off her clothes. Though he understood that Rui Wen was in a state where her body and soul were in a chaotic state, moving around while carrying foreign objects was indeed a burden. But of course he couldn't say that now. It shouldn't be early anymore. We've just started tonight, so don't exhaust yourself. Tomorrow, it should be the 13th already. Today is Monday, and you still have to go to school. Go back and rest first. I'll ponder over a more efficient method. We're going to build this fake plane. It's not as simple as finding a suitable large fragment and throwing the automatically compiled environmental parameters inside. It's a very complicated process. Right now, we're drawing up blueprints and finding a suitable foundation stone. All of this is just preparatory work. Aside from these 2 points, it also depends on whether or not my ability in the aspect of space-time configuration can support it. Of course, we also need to have a clear schedule. If we can't build it well, we can't fool people. If we get knocked on the door before we even finish building it, then it'll be even more awkward. At this time, we can't just bury ourselves in work. We need to understand the situation outside. We need to think things over and plan as a whole. Do you understand? Luo Nan chattered on, feeling that his eloquence had improved. Rui Wen didn't speak. It looked like she was still a bit emotional, but in the end, she was a good and obedient child. She wouldn't contradict Luo Nan, and she wouldn't act on her own. Luo Nan was quite reassured about this. Okay. Hurry up and go take a nap. If time is tight, I'll urge you to skip class. Make your preparations. He coaxed and persuaded Rui Wen out of the mist maze in the end. Luo Nan let out a long sigh of relief. He looked at the numerous and complicated environmental projections within the simulator, and his brows unconsciously furrowed. The words he said just now weren't completely coaxing her. They were all based on facts. He really did need to properly organize his thoughts and make a choice at this time. Luo Nan retreated from the mist maze with this thought. He tore a crack in his own sandwich domain and accurately entered the lower-level main cabin of the luxurious yacht by the shore of Northern Mountain Lake. Luo Nan most likely wouldn't have been able to do this before tonight. In the highly warped environment of space and time, Luo Nan wouldn't have been able to casually jump across worlds without establishing an anchor point in advance. Perhaps he would have been flung into outer space in a flash. Therefore, whether it was when he arrived at Ban City or when he killed Gong Qi, he needed to set up an anchor point in advance to ensure precision. He also needed to borrow some external force to guide him. As for the current situation, he could already see Rue Wen's back. Forget it. He was still far from it. Right now, the luxurious yacht was completely covered by Luo Nan's sandwich domain. Space and time were warped, and external objects were concealed. Even a character like the Pope of 100 Conversions was unable to forcefully pry through the reality of this place. Unless they wanted to fight with real swords and guns. Although the people on the yacht were in a dangerous situation, the pressure they endured was much less than it was yesterday morning. Yin Lu and Snake Tongue had been on standby this entire time. They stood up at the same time by chance when they saw Luo Nan stride through space. Luo Nan gestured to the two of them, telling them to calm down a bit. At the same time, he separated a strand of his mind to traverse a distance of over 1,000 kilometers to establish contact with a communication wristband placed in the underground base of Gear on the north bank. Finding He Yueyin to understand the situation was the correct choice. However, he was drowned in an unending stream of notifications the moment he established contact with the wristband. You have a friend request. You have a friend. You have a friend. You have several dozen, over 100 friend requests flew over like snowflakes. With a single glance, Luo Nan could tell that they were all powerful people with illustrious reputations. However, no matter how great their reputations were, they were all overdone when piled together. Instead, the few notifications sandwiched in between the friend requests were quite eye-catching. According to the Special Citizen Protection Regulations, your guardian Luo Shuqing's social privileges have been raised to A+ rank. According to the Special Citizen Protection Regulations, your guardian Mo Haihong's social privileges have been raised to A+ rank. Your relative Mo Ya. Your relative Mo Pang. Luo Nan's eyelids twitched 3 times as he looked at these notification messages. Chapter 887. Luo Nan was able to feel the impact his actions over the past 2 days brought to the world from the notifications that popped up one after another. Whether it was the inner world or the secular world, nothing was immune. Especially his circle of friends and family. The shock waves stirred up from this, especially the distortions formed in his social network, would bring him quite a bit of influence for quite some time. Luo Nan pondered seriously for a few seconds. Then he discovered that he was completely clueless in thinking. It was tantamount to a waste of time, so he let this problem go for now. He connected to his communication wristband in order to find He Yueyin to understand the current situation. He had not forgotten this goal. But contrary to his expectations, He Yueyin did not immediately connect after he sent the communication request. Instead, the message mechanism was triggered, and He Yueyin's pre-recorded voice was heard. Hello, it's not convenient for me to answer right now. Before the recording could finish playing, there was a sudden jump. It was still a recording, but it had already named Luo Nan. Mr. Luo, I am currently in a state of silent communication. If you hear this message, please contact Her Majesty Empress Wu directly. Is this treatment specially given to me? Luo Nan knew that this was an intelligent setting made from the number judgment. In fact, many groups could be arranged, but Luo Nan still felt quite comfortable in his heart. He hung up and wanted to call Her Majesty Empress Wu, but he was a bit hesitant. Truth be told, out of the iron triangle of Xia City, this person was the one who gave him the most pressure. He had the first impression of being taught a lesson the first time he met her. He had gradually accumulated impressions and judgments. He also had to keep a respectful distance from this mysterious and deep person. Perhaps reverence was a better way to put it? In the end, Luo Nan did not contact Her Majesty Empress Wu at the first instance. Just like how people dealt with matters, they unconsciously wanted to leave the most difficult problem until the end. Only the heavens knew what arrangements Her Majesty Empress Wu would have. It seemed that she was used to being a boss, so it was quite easy for her to arrange tasks. Before this, Luo Nan needed to deal with the matters at hand. Only now did he turn his gaze to the 2 ladies to the side. Yin Lu had assumed a respectful and solemn posture, but when Luo Nan's gaze shifted over, her waist and back subconsciously tensed up a bit, and her head automatically drooped down. This posture was quite proper, but Snake Tongue, who was right next to her, was even more exaggerated. She bent her knees and knelt on the tatami. Her palms were crossed, and her forehead was pressed forward. She was humble, solemn, and solemn. For a time, even Yinlu found it hard to understand Snake Tongue's current state of mind. But she was able to faintly sense that Luo Nan, who was in front of her, swept his gaze over without any difference due to their kneeling and standing postures. In the eyes of this person, standing solemnly and kneeling was a must. Or perhaps, the simple level of posture was far from enough to make a difference. Half a second later, Yinlu and Snake Tongue heard a simple arrangement. Wait a moment. Luo Nan had already opened up the virtual work area as he spoke. He took out the records of the exoskeleton frame defects that he and Rue Wen had summarized in the tree-hole space. He added a rough modification plan and organized them a bit. Following that, he gave a simple description and structural sketch of some of the reserve masks he discovered after successfully activating the invisible yarn with the lamination interference. The information and data from both sides were sealed and sent to President Wan. Luo Nan needed Dean Wan to give him a look when it came to the construction tool for the perfect body that was necessary for the lamination interference technique. Dean Wan was a true master of craft design. He had the vision and ability to turn something rotten into something magical. Luo Nan hoped that the modifications this time would allow the structure, toughness, and strength of the exoskeleton frame to have a clear upgrade. If he could increase the duration of the perfect body by a fold, no, as long as he could increase it by a third, he would have the confidence to fight a mid-level extraordinary level battle by himself. As for the masks, they were materials for deeper research. They were also Luo Nan's advance payment. Oh, that's right. Luo Nan suddenly thought of something and turned to instruct Yinlu. Tell Master Shou that there might still need to be some adjustments made to the technology that was confirmed the night before yesterday. Tell them to control the progress and just take out 3 to 5 sets as backup. We'll have to wait for news later. Yinlu responded and was about to find a veteran to contact, but Luo Nan raised his hand to stop her. There's one more thing. I might need to mobilize the believers of the Blood Flame Order for the next 2 days to help me do some experiments. Actually, it's similar to the practice of the dream entering technique. I need them to help me do some identification work. Yeah, it's like a closed beta game, finding bugs and the like. Yinlu didn't quite understand what Luo Nan was saying. Luo Nan just needed to inform him of this matter. As his personal secretary, all she needed to do was nod her head in agreement. As for her identity as the Vice Oblatum of the Blood Flame Order, it was indeed more convenient for her to help Luo Nan with some organizational work. Yinlu discovered a problem because she thought about it a bit more. Sir, do you need to keep your closed beta a secret? The believers of the Order are intermingled with the good and the bad. There will always be a few people like Cadman. It's fine. They won't remember. Luo Nan's gaze shifted to Snake Tongue as he spoke. He gazed at the classic structure and color combination of this beautiful kimono-clad woman's jet black hairbun and snow-white jade hairpin. You can refer to Snake Tongue's state. She probably didn't remember any details during her last experience. And that Cadman. Did he say anything after he returned? Yinlu came to a sudden realization. Snake Tongue's body tensed up even more because Luo Nan had intentionally or unintentionally placed her and Cadman side by side. Her forehead faintly rubbed against the back of her hand, but she still didn't say a word. Luo Nan didn't need to talk to her heart at this time. He just gave an order in passing. Snake Tongue, you need to do more of this work for the next 2 days. Experience it well and evaluate it seriously. Of course, you must remember it clearly this time and explain it clearly. Understood. Snake Tongue's voice was heavy. She enunciated each word clearly, but her tail still carried a bit of a tremor. That's about it. If there's anything else, I'll look for you guys. Luo Nan was only thinking about these things right now. He waved his hand and let Yinlu and Snake Tongue make their own arrangements. He circled his train of thought and continued to hesitate. Should he give Her Majesty Empress Wu a call? Perhaps he should beat around the bush a bit? Luo Nan's thoughts spun, and he subconsciously used the Hexa ear to enter the psychic wave network. He entered his friend group, which he hadn't spoken in a while. There was a group of friends from the Xia City branch, especially Zhang Yingying, Her Majesty Empress Wu's trusted aide and informant. Well, the group was unexpectedly lively today. It seemed that a newcomer had just been introduced. It was done by Zhang Yingying. I'm borrowing your precious land to post an advertisement. May 14th, Acumen College's Great Auditorium, Conference Room 3. Two professors, Wu Zuanliang and Ding Jing, will be presenting an academic report on the interference and comparative study of suspected planar pollution sources. Experts, scholars, and people interested in the ecology of the wilderness and planar research are invited to participate and support. This is just a small token of my appreciation. Little sister. Many blessings. Then a large red packet popped up on the chat interface. The picture used to decorate it was of a red-faced baby girl wearing a peony robe. She bowed with her hands clasped in front of her. She looked charmingly naive. Luo Nan looked at the ostentatious advertising slogan and the red packet with the image of a big lucky baby girl. He especially saw the name that had just been added. Several elements piled up and shone upon him. He felt that his injuries from yesterday hadn't healed yet. A mouthful of old blood was stuck in his throat, and he nearly spat it out. Chapter 888. Let's not talk about the thoughts of a certain guy who was spying on us. In this small chat group, many experienced players had already honked their horns in greeting and warmly welcomed the arrival of the new beauty. Octopus that doesn't produce knockout drugs. Little girl, you're very smart. Now all you're missing is a selfie. Paper doll. The advertisement isn't official. What's the exact time? Contact information? Please give me your number. We can talk privately. Moral standard rising higher. Personal friend list is open. Please add me as a friend. The privacy protection of a newbie is a bit too much. Please give me some pointers. Occasionally, some serious people, such as Shui Lei, who logged in with his real name, would honestly express his opinion. The frequency of new planes has been quite high these days. Even the mortal world is involved in this? The Deep Blue World documentary is about to be screened. Cat Eyes released a promotional poster. The main color of the poster was dark blue, and it presented a silent and gloomy scene of the seabed. Crag burst. It's most likely just a PowerPoint presentation. There's no sign at all. It's good that it's affected. Zhang Yingying continued to support her colleagues. Since the newcomer is acting cute, if you have time, go and support him. If you don't have time, go and support him. As expected, it was Peony. As expected, she was deliberately acting cute. The diving Luo Nan chuckled twice. Ever since he became acquainted with Peony, his partner, he had seen her sharp, astute, confident, and even decadent appearance. But no matter what, he only felt that she was a mature and mysterious senior sister. Her beautiful skin was filled with stories, but he really couldn't match up to her adorable appearance just a moment ago. Speaking of which, he still didn't know this senior sister Tang Yi well enough. As he sighed, Luo Nan subconsciously sent a sweating emoji to the group. In the next second, the group of a few dozen people was completely shaken. Oh my god! Zhang Yingying only had time to send out this one sentence before a series of emoticons flooded in. From the simplest ors to the most complicated emoticons, there were also emoticons that were full of worship. There was no doubt that these were all emotional responses to the great things Luo Nan had done these past 2 days. It was not easy for a friend to mock him and cut off his emotions. Luo Yunqing, please accept a bow from your little brother. What? Should we change it to Song of Clouds and Water? I think the Civ plane is more direct. Isn't it Luo Yuan Y? Suddenly, a blabbermouth pierced the most delicate part of the present situation. The screen was flooded. There was an obvious pause, and then someone sent a sweating emoji. Very quickly, the emoji became a string. Bamboo Pole, also known as Moral Standard Steadily Increasing, said, "Hey, admin, delete the chat records later." Aren't you one? Then should I delete it now? Go. The group of people joked around and managed to smooth things over. Actually, Luo Nan really didn't care much about it. His new nickname and his new appearance of Mr. M.O. were also fine. They were originally meant for people to talk about. That kind of nonsensical state was also something that could only be supported or broken by 1 or 2 scattered pieces of so-called evidence. He took this opportunity to greet Peony. Hello, senior sister. You're back in Xia City. Not a cute girl? Octopus couldn't tell if he was disappointed or curious. She's a very pretty big sister. Luonan casually acted cute. It could be considered a solid hammer. She's also the boss of my society. 3. It was only now that Xie Junping, who had just joined the group a few days ago, finally confirmed the identity of the newcomer. He had been going along with and learning the communication methods of his ability user seniors. Senior. Tang. Yes, young Master Xie. Peony had returned to her normal tone at this time. Perhaps it could be said that she was a bit too formal. Also, Professor Luo is too polite. You can just call me Peony. Sweat, you're too polite. It's not like we're at school. Plus, you've taken a leave of absence. Everyone isn't optimistic about the possibility of you resuming classes. You can't be thinking that calling me senior sister will be beneficial, right? The bad friends in the group confirmed Peony's true temperament. They immediately slapped the table and laughed wildly. Peony spoke before Luo Nan could respond. In this way, we're all people of society. Professor Luo, you're the thigh. We're all counting on you to guide us. Luo Nan was speechless for a time. Perhaps Peony was having her period today. Otherwise, how could her mood change so quickly? She put on a cute face to others, but she was full of sarcasm to them? Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed, but Peony's words received considerable support and resonance in the chat group. Dogs of wealth bark at each other. Of course, Boss Luo needs to bark a few more times right now. Can you make an appointment for a face-to-face tutorial class? Speaking of which, 2 days ago Gao Tianshi and the others played with a bug in the fortress. Boss Luo, you should take the time to overhaul it. It was hard to tell whether the words were jeering or grumbling, but Peony stood out from the crowd. She deliberately stirred up trouble. Speaking of which, Ying is righteous. She bluntly attacked Abner. Professor Luo, no, Boss Luo hasn't expressed anything yet. Yesterday's extraordinary round table conference, especially the details of the conference, had only circulated within a small circle. Most of the members of the group didn't know about it. However, the name Abner reverberated like thunder to the ears of the members of the Ability User Society. So much so that a series of dumbstruck emojis were sent over the moment they heard the name. Zhang Yingying replied below, attacking a fellow that deserves to be attacked. It's none of my business. Luo Nan knew about this matter. Although the majority of the people in the virtual conference hall were extraordinaries, the number of spectators was enough to spread out the probability distribution of the altar spiderweb and daytime nightmare. What's more, there were so many people who intentionally disturbed them. He had followed pretty much the entire time, so he knew the situation inside like the back of his hand. But Luo Nan didn't know what to say for a time in this sort of communication environment. Words of thanks were certainly not enough. It would be too distant. But what should he say? Luo Nan felt a bit peculiar. His heart was a bit muddled. He was uncertain. He couldn't see clearly. He always felt a bit awkward. Luckily, Peony spoke up at this time. According to the rules, there has to be some benefits. Speaking of which, the first thing to do is to protect her. Otherwise, President Abner will crush her to death with a single finger. Of course. Luo Nan recovered with great difficulty. He subconsciously sent a message. If Abner dares to reach out, I'll break his bones. Wow. Domineering. The boss is mighty. Take a screenshot as a souvenir. Zhang Yingying went along with the fun and sent a starry-eyed gif. Her eyes were red, and her heart was in a mess. But she didn't say anything after that. Luo Nan's feelings became even more subtle after he said those words. What was up with this sort of, it's only right and proper to talk nonsense feeling? Don't forget about the benefits. Isn't it only right and proper to give benefits to others? The opposite is a mess. This is society. Peony seemed to be sighing with emotion. Think about it. These words are said to a true god. You want to give them benefits, give them rewards, and so on. Is this a bribe or an insult? It's like a world war. This is society and its rules. Luo Nan wanted to send another message, but he didn't know what to say. The subtle feelings in his heart continued to grow, and he seemed to understand something. Was this Peony's idea? Or was it her boss' idea? In the end, he didn't chat too much in the group. He found Her Majesty Empress Wu's contact information while harboring complex and subtle feelings. The call connected within a few seconds. Literature Hall, you're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.